Morning, Commissioner Plant.
Good morning.
I just want to see if there's anything we need to address this morning before we go back on the record. Hearing nothing. Oh, Ms. Coleman?
Good morning. I just wanted to note for the record that SWEEP has uploaded PDF versions of hearing exhibits 517, 519, and 520 into SWEEP's box, and I've let Ms. Federico know. But if there are any further questions, we can address it.
Okay.
These are the executable spreadsheets.
Perfect. And these are the PDF version of the executable spreadsheet.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. And I think we've got Ms. Kunkel with us today, but that sounds good. Anything else, Mr. Koshin, before we go on the record?
Yes, Commissioner Gilman. Yesterday, you were asking a series of questions regarding the MMBTU price for the RNG.
Yeah.
And we have developed a highly confidential version of an attachment to Ms. Garduña's testimony that's in box as well, and a public version. Both of those have been added to box this morning and are available.
Okay, can we deal with that when we go back on the record and maybe move them in?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think I'm not the lawyer around here, but I think that's what we need to do. Okay, if we've got nothing else before we get started, we are back on the record in proceeding 23A-0633G, the Black Hills, Colorado gas 2024 to 2028 clean heat plan, second day of the evidentiary hearing. And Mr. Koshin, maybe I can invite you back since we're now on the record to let us know the availability of a new exhibit.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman. Yes, based on discussions yesterday, you were asking some questions about the RNG's price per MMBTU. We have a spreadsheet, a highly confidential and a public version that is in the company's box and is available. I don't know that we want to pull up the highly confidential version on the screen, but if you would like a request that hearing exhibit 102 attachment MKG5, the public version, be pulled up on the screen. And so the highly confidential version does have that pricing per MMBTU fleshed out.
Okay. And so are you moving for both of these to be added to the record?
Yes, Your Honor, I would request that they both be entered into the record.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Koshin. Appreciate you following up on that. Any objections? Hearing none, we'll move those into the record. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for that follow-up. Anything else before? And we also did get an update from Ms. Coleman that SWEEP has provided PDF copies of the executable documents. They moved into the record yesterday as well. Those were already moved in yesterday, so I don't think there's any additional action needed there. Anything else before we go ahead and get started and bring Mr. Cottrell back? Hearing none, I would ask Black Hills to please bring your witness back for us to finish up some questions. Good morning. Go ahead, Mr. Cottrell. Oh, thank you. Mr. Cottrell, just wanted to remind you you're still under oath from yesterday. Do you understand that?
Yes, understood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just have a couple questions, primarily around hearing exhibit 519. So, Ms. Kunkel, I wanted to see if you could pull up hearing exhibit 519 for me. It might take a minute. It's an executable Excel version.
Sorry about that. I had a different attachment open. Sorry, give me a second.
Sorry. Yeah, no worries. While she's getting that open, Mr. Cachell, I just had a couple questions for you. So just to confirm, we talked quite a bit yesterday about new construction DSM rebates. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay, and so in order to get any new construction rebates from the company, a home would have to be primarily heated with gas. Is that correct?
It's a good question. I don't think that is a requirement. I would have to check the program requirements. I know they have to receive gas service in order to participate and receive an incentive, but primarily to heat with gas, I'm not sure that's correct. I would have to check.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, and I got that idea off the company's application that was shown yesterday. I think it was listed as one of the terms, but feel free to verify. Okay. And then for the prescriptive rebates for new construction specifically, in the case where those do not exceed local prescriptive building code requirements, how does the company identify that?
Again, I think we would need to bring in the implementation team for new construction DSM in order to answer some of those questions of the operations. The assumptions for the modeling and the planning is that any measures that were incentivized would exceed local code and be above the baseline. So we'd have to bring in the implementation team to answer some of those specific actionable questions and how it's being seen in the field.
Okay. To your knowledge, though, does the company exclude individual rebates in certain areas or jurisdictions based on code requirements there?
I don't have that information.
Okay. And just looking at some of the rebates that are offered, so there's for example, a rebate for R19 basement wall insulation. Does that sound familiar to one of the rebate offerings for residential new construction?
Generally, yes. Is that in the existing program or is that a new add-on? I just want to be clear.
Existing.
Okay, yeah, it sounds clear. Yeah, the base installation is included.
Okay. Are you familiar with what version of the IECC code requirements that would exceed?
I would have to look. I think we're looking at it earlier. I believe it's 2022, but I don't recall the specific number off the top of my head.
And what about new residential new construction rebates look to be given for floor insulation of R30 and R38 at differing levels of incentives? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, again, I'd have to look and bring up those specific baselines of what they're being compared against. I don't have that those specific measures directly in front of me.
Okay.
We can provide it. We should have it within the DSM plan that was recently filed and is front of the commission that shows it should show the baseline and the efficient unit and what it's being compared against.
Okay. And that's in order to determine the greenhouse gas savings associated, energy savings and greenhouse gas savings associated with the measure?
Correct. Yes, that determines the energy savings, the BTUs or therm savings, and then that gets converted to greenhouse gas. Correct.
Okay. And is that a static assumption across the entire system, or is it dependent upon some local conditions in terms of what baseline is assumed to be compared to?
Standard practice has been a consistent baseline across the entire service territory. Hasn't necessarily been differentiated in the planning. For implementation and evaluation on ex post on the back end, would have to check, but at least for planning purposes, we assume a consistent baseline across the service territory.
Okay. And is there some verification done by the company to ensure that these rebate levels or the measures being rebated are meeting the most predominant local code versions or exceeding the most predominant local codes?
That I don't know.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I want to go to this. Thank you for pulling it up, Ms. Kunkel. Can we go to the beneficial electrification tab? It's the fourth tab. I just wanted to understand some of these inputs and where they came from, Mr. Cottrell, to the extent you can help me with that, that would be very helpful. So if we can scroll down, seeing to the left, and if you want, you could go up to view, maybe Ms. Kunkel, and get us into normal view. Thanks. Perfect. Can we just scroll down to cell E126? So this has the lifetime decatherm impacts as well as the annual decatherm impacts. Yeah, over left. So you see line, I think it's 125, 126 in columns D and E.
I do.
Are you familiar where this information comes from? I mean, it specifically says it's unlinked and these are hard entered values.
Got it. I would have to pull. So for that's inclusive of what the Rocky Ford, the assumed savings and the emission savings associated with the Rocky Ford pilot, which was approximately 30 homes that would receive electrification. So we could walk it back and provide the actual calculations of where that 337 and the 4826 and 2024 comes from. But broadly speaking, it's based on about 30 or so homes, 20 to 30 homes, depending on the year, that receive electrification in the Rocky Ford area.
Okay. And this is already helpful. Okay, so what I'm seeing on the left, like the blue type stuff, is Rocky Ford. And then is it that the black charts on the right are the commission ordered evaluations?
Correct. Those are on the right-hand side in the gray. Those are the supplemental scenarios for full and partial electrification. That's correct.
Okay, thanks. That wasn't immediately apparent to me, so I was trying to ensure I understood that. So if I'm looking also at lines 126 and 125, I could, I guess, infer the life of the measure here, which I'm getting at about 14.3 years, by dividing out the lifetime by the annual expectation.
Correct. I believe there's a variety of measures in there that have varying lives. So correct. Yeah, I think that's about right. I believe the heat pump itself has an 18-year life, but there's some other shorter measures that could be included within the package. So yeah, I think that math works.
Okay, got it. Okay, cool. So now going over to the data more on the right, which as I understand it now reflects the commission ordered evaluation and supplemental. So if we go down to R96, this lists the annual decatherm impacts per participant. Do you see that? The label's in Q, but the data's in R and S.
Sure. I just have to move some things out.
Yep, it's the second line of data in the top black table.
Okay, annual decatherms per, yes, okay,
Yeah,
I see.
sorry, the numbers are hard to follow all the way across. So this is looking at the company's modeling expectation with regard to the annual decatherm savings basically associated per participant with the electrification scenarios. Is that accurate?
Correct. So that's the avoided usage. So in the full electrification, you would remove all gas usage. So that's why it's a little bit higher. So that basically be full electric heating and remove all the gas usage. In the partial for the 60 decatherms, that represents still having natural gas as a backup heating source. So that's why it's a little bit lower there. You're still having some natural gas as a backup.
Got it. Okay. And then what's the basis for those values?
Yeah, I think we use
what they signify, but where's the data come from?
Sure. So it's the I believe we used, if it's, I'm not sure if those are hard coded or if that's within this model or not. Okay, so we could pull and provide the actual calculations. So basically for the full electrification is the easiest one to understand, where it's use the ELFH, equivalent load full hours. So there's 8760 hours in a year. Equivalent load full hours of a furnace is 2000 hours. I'm making up a value, but in that range. So then we multiply that by the usage per hour in order to heat a home to get the overall therms used throughout the entire year. So we can provide that full calculation for you of how it was derived. Mainly those come from the DSM plan. So in the DSM plan, there is a baseline and efficient unit where you calculate the full usage between them, subtract them out from each other, and that gives you your savings. This is the little bit different because it's full usage. So it's the full usage for a baseline unit for the entire year.
Okay. And since you could have a mix of efficient and non-efficient gas heating equipment that you're saving, you know, essentially if you're fully electrifying someone, you're removing their gas equipment, independent of how efficient that was. Are you familiar what efficiency assumptions are inferred here with regard to the gas equipment that's being replaced?
I would need to double check. I believe it would be at the time federal baseline, which would be 80%, which is the same assumption that SWEEP used within their modeling that Mr. Conj used as well, because the general assumption for DSM when someone is replacing their unit is that they're replacing it on failure. So they're generally at the end of their useful life of their measure, and then they need to make a decision on what they're replacing with. So they can either replace it with the baseline unit, in this case, if it was a furnace, it'd be 80%, or the efficient unit. But then also layer on here, when this customer was replacing on failure, instead of choosing the baseline unit for a natural gas forced air furnace, they're choosing to electrify. So they're avoiding using the current federal baseline, or at the time current federal baseline, and instead going with an efficient heat pump.
Okay.
DSM is the same. Yeah, so same concept.
Okay. And is there any verification on these assumed kind of derived, assumed usage totals versus kind of typical annual residential use in Black Hills service territory?
So the company does annual impact evaluations by a third-party independent evaluator. So they do various installation verification, they do savings validation, and a variety of net to gross calculations, which is how much did the incentive actually influence their decision. So there's a whole variety and a battery of information that these impact evaluations calculate and report on, and they do that on an annual basis.
Okay. I think I was asking a slightly different question. In deriving the assumed usage of all of the equipment that is being replaced, you know, the assumed old gas usage of that customer, which, as I understand, is kind of a derived calculation. Is there any comparison to, say, average residential gas usage on an annual basis in Black Hills gas service territory to kind of calibrate and understand, do we have that assumption right?
So you're asking if there's a pre-post kind of if we look at natural gas usage before they installed the efficient equipment versus after?
No. Is there any tethering of your assumption for how much natural gas this house uses compared to what is actual average among residential consumers in Black Hills gas? Or it is just a calculation?
Oh, so you're asking if there's metering done on the back end in order to verify? I don't know if the impact evaluations
nothing about,
do any of that.
Forget about the improvement, like the house as it was before. We're assuming it used, 114 decatherms of gas. Is there any verification with data from Black Hills Gas? Is that what looks like average in their service territory?
Understood. Not that I'm aware of, specifically for Colorado Gas. I believe there's been billing analysis type studies that have looked at existing equipment versus what's average in the service territory in other areas, but specifically for Colorado Gas, not that I'm aware. There could be, but not that I'm aware of.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Sorry if I wasn't very clear on that. And then going down to lines 158 and 159. This shows the electric impacts per customer. Do you see that box? It's the second from the bottom box.
I do.
Okay. And I was curious, this information is also hard entered. So I was curious where this information can be referenced or derived from.
Basically the same calculations as we used for the forced air furnace, with total efficiency of a unit multiplied by the hours of usage, and the usage per hour. And this is based on the efficient unit that is modeled is for Colorado Electric service territory. So it's not the same exact overlap geographically, but the calculation is ready available. So we could provide that as well, where it's the expected amount of kilowatt hour usage to heat the home throughout the entire year within each scenario.
Okay. And upon what's the assumption for the efficiency of the electric replacement?
I'd need to double check. I believe it is an 18 SEER and a 10.5 HSPF, which is an efficient unit, but I would have to double check that specifically.
Okay. Is there any place that would have been listed? I mean, I'm happy to look. I just don't know where I could look.
I don't know if we listed that out, that specificity in my supplemental testimony or not.
Okay. And then with regard to the assumed gas unit, it's replacing, I think you are articulating this, but is this the same answer as before, where we're assuming this is an old, relatively inefficient unit that's being replaced at burnout, or is there some mix of different gas efficiencies assumed as you then convert that load to electric?
Yeah, so this comparison is basically for the gas versus the electric is new to new. So a new efficient heat pump versus a new baseline gas unit. Because the assumption is that this customer who is electrifying is replacing on failure. They're already making the decision that they need a new heating system. So then they're making the choice either to stick with gas or to go with electrification. So it's actually a lower gas savings than it would have been.
Okay. And then sorry, I'm just trying to think it through, make sure I'm understanding. But you are anticipating full incentive. So you're not anticipating that customer has a cost they're already paying for some HVAC equipment. You're planning on giving them the full cost of the electric solution, but in DSM, base it on the incremental cost of a new gas solution?
Correct. So if the customer electrified, the proposal is to pay full cost in order to move them from gas to electric, in order to have them make the decision to fuel switch and go through that process. If they stayed with their current fuel, less hurdles, cheaper cost, it would just be covered in paying an incentive of the incremental cost. Whereas if someone electrified, it would be covering the entire cost to incentivize them to make that fuel switch, which is a little bit of a bigger jump.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, so as I'm understanding, for these electric impacts, you assume if not electrifying, the customer was actually going to have a high efficiency gas unit, right?
We assumed a baseline unit.
Wait, sorry, I just thought you just said the opposite. Looking at these electric impacts per participant, you see that box?
I do.
I understood you just to say you assumed the equipment was replaced at burned out so that your gas that you're calculating all of this off of was an efficient model.
Yeah, apologies. I was talking about I mentioned two separate things in the same kind of paragraph. So I was just making the comparison for incentive purposes. If someone was going from the customers loses their heat, or it's a replace on burnout situation. If the customer was staying with gas, the incentive is based on a percentage of incremental cost of that gas equipment because they're sticking with the same fuel and it's a smaller hurdle. They're already going to be replacing gas with gas. So we're just incentivizing them to move to a higher efficient unit if they're staying with gas, and we're incentivizing that unit. So that's if we're staying with gas. If for electric, then the thought process and reasoning behind going with a full incentive for electrification is because it's a hurdle to convince customers and have them convert from their current fuel to electric in order to make them switch. So that's why we're using full cost of the equipment in order to incentivize them to make that change. So I was strictly talking about incentives and why we do one incentive versus the other for electrification versus if they were staying with a gas heating fuel.
Okay, sorry, I got that.
Separately, yeah. Okay, no, sorry, yeah. And then separately, our comparison for fuel usage, if that customer electrified and they were changing they were upgrading their heating system, we are comparing an efficient electric system to the baseline gas system, because if they stuck with gas, they would have had that baseline system. So that's the fair unit for comparison for the fuel usage when we calculate that differential.
And again, that baseline is what efficiency? Sorry.
A new baseline unit. So I believe it's 80%.
A new baseline unit, which is 80%.
Correct.
Okay. So you're not assuming a comparison against a new efficient gas unit.
Correct.
Okay. In any of these calculations, basically on the right-hand side of this tab?
And these, no. Yeah, that's consistent. Sweep used the same calculations and the same methodology.
Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't getting turned around in where we were going with that. Can we go to, let's go back to the energy efficiency clean heat plan tab, which is the immediately prior tab. If we go up to line 6, there's the total lifetime savings. Wait, well, let's see where I was. Lifetime savings. Oh, sorry. If you go to the immediately prior tab, the energy efficiency DSM. So here on line 6, we have total lifetime savings in decatherms, and these are hard entered. Are these just copied over from the DSM plan, or what's the source of these hard entered values?
It was an earlier version of DSM plan, yes, because at the time of filing, the 2026 to 2027 plan was not yet filed yet. So yes, this was just copied over from the previous DSM plan.
Okay, got it.
And then assumed held constant moving forward. Okay,
got it. And then as we go down to lines 126 through 135, maybe I got to go to the clean heat plan. Maybe my notes are not ideal here. Yeah, go to the clean heat plan tab. 126 through 135 here. This is the incremental DSM. Do you see that set of data there?
I do.
Okay. If we go over to the right, columns S and T show the annual and lifetime decatherms. And I was curious what the source of that data is. Those are also hard entered in here.
So the basis was the current DSM plan at time of filing, using their factors in the annual decatherms per dollar. And then we just multiplied it out, use it as a factor. So we developed a factor using the existing DSM plan. And then based on the incremental dollars that were coming from clean heat, applied that decatherm factor to the budget that we had for clean heat. Okay,
got it. So these are essentially mimicking the the values or the rates of decatherm savings for each measure from the DSM plan?
Correct, at the time. Now, these will have to be likely need to be updated in a compliance filing or some other form to coincide with the new 26 through 27 DSM plan, which has some slight differences. But I just wanted to make that side note. But yes, it would be a straight derivative from the DSM plan.
Okay, thanks. Just looking, I'll let you know, back on the left, the third line of data here is for residential new construction market rate. And the fourth line is residential new construction income qualified. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, so if we scroll back to the right for those decatherm savings in S&T, those are identical for market rate and income qualified. And I was just curious, I mean, this seems to me to indicate that the assumed baseline efficiency as well as size of the home, everything is identical for income qualified as it would be for market rate. And I was just curious upon what that assumption is based.
I would have to check on that specifically. I don't know that off the top. Apologies.
Would it kind of intuitively make sense that we're assuming the same house size and other features for income qualified as for market rate?
Typically, income qualified would be slightly less efficient. It depends on markets and other things, but typically income qualified would be slightly less efficient than slightly smaller and less efficient than market rate.
Okay. But in here, it looks like just the same exact data is used to represent that group.
I do. I'm not sure if that's a typo because the budgets are differentiated between the two. So that could be a copy error. I just don't recall that specific line.
Okay, got it. And then in addition to the decatherm savings for certain measures, these spreadsheets also list out peak therm savings. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Can you explain to me what the peak therm savings would represent versus, say, the gross therm savings for a measure?
So the gross therms are basically the summation of savings throughout the entire calendar year, 8760, how much therms are saved throughout the entire year. And the peak therms are for the peak usage day within the system.
Okay.
Only for that, the therm saved on that singular day.
Okay. So that's effectively a representation of how much that measure is reducing the peak capacity needs for the system.
Exactly correct. Yes.
Okay. And I'm curious, is there any financial consideration or accounting for that avoidance of future capacity expansion needs on the gas system by reducing the peak capacity needs through the measure?
We didn't explicitly include that. Discussing with the various planners, and I believe we had some discussions with Sweep on this in the initial hearing, in that the amount of throughput reduced based on the clean heat plan would be pretty small, so that they didn't expect there to be any specific capital infrastructure avoidance from this reduction of throughput. So we discussed it with the subject matter experts at the company, but it was assumed to be zero within this clean heat plan.
Okay. And then I know there are some, I think, assumptions on a further tab about the life of the different measures, but it looks to be for kind of the existing DSM measures. So I wasn't able to identify your exact assumption for the life used for electric heat pumps specifically within your electrification analysis. Do you know what kind of equipment life was assumed?
Typically it's 18 years.
Typically, were different assumptions used in different circumstances?
I don't believe so. I'd have to check. We used 18 years for almost all of our modeling for heat pumps.
Okay. Okay, got it. And well, if I look at actually, let's go all the way to the furthest right tab. Wait a minute. Oh. Okay. The BCA analysis, sorry, last blue one. pretty far. Let's see, where is it? This is where I found the life assumption in here somewhere. Give me 1 second, I'll locate it. Oh, sorry. I knew I had seen it in here where it was listed, but it was listed on the, oh, program detail summary. Sorry, next tab. No, yeah. So here, column AQ says EUL at the top. Is that the expected life that I would see in column AQ, which says EUL?
Yeah, it stands for effective useful life.
Okay, got it. And just for example, in here, the company is using 20 years for a boiler, most insulation 20 years, furnace 18 years. And then I think like if you look at line 51 for a gas heat pump, there aren't electric heat pumps on this list, which is why I'd asked you, but the gas heat pumps look to be in some cases 15 years and in some cases 18 years.
Right. So gas heat pumps are different than electric
Okay.
heat pumps. So these are only DSM measures that would either be included within the DSM program or supplemental in supplemental incentives from clean heat only. So none of the electric measures would be included within this listing. This is only for the DSM.
Okay, okay. But to your understanding, for all of the electric heat pumps, you used 18 years.
Yeah, that would be consistent with what we use for Color Electric. I believe Excel uses the same.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm since it wasn't on this list, I couldn't kind of compare what was being used.
Sure.
Thanks, Ms. Kunkel. I appreciate your patience in dragging through this. Mr. Cottrell, those are my only additional questions. Commissioner Plant, just wanted to check back in with you on anything.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do have a couple of just quick questions. Just follow up with your discussion with Commissioner Gilman, and then a couple of follow-up questions from yesterday. You mentioned that the BE incentive for heat pumps was based on the full cost of electrification, and I think you had that at about $31,000 in that spreadsheet that we were looking at. When you say incentive, are you talking about the incentive that's offered to the customer, or are you talking about just the cost basis for determining the MTRC? Was the assumption
Yeah.
incentive like the customer gets full incentive, or I'm trying to understand your terminology there.
Yeah, really good question. So for this situation, the all-in cost, including equipment, installation, administration, delivery, is $31,000 and change, is the full all-in cost. Just the equipment cost for the heat pump itself, including the efficient heat pump at the right sizing, cold climate with wiring, et cetera, is about $21,000 was our assumption. And then we also included in that 31,000 is a heat pump water heater as well, which is about a little over $5,000. So, but if you isolate just the air source heat pump, efficient air source heat pump all in, would be about $21,000. So that you could hypothetically consider that the incentive to the customer.
Okay, so when you say this is what I wanted to get at, the incentive to the customer is your proposal that the customer would get a $21,000 incentive towards the installation of that heat pump for the purchase?
No, the proposal is that there's nothing out of the pocket for the customer at all. The company's implementation contractor comes in, does all the work. They install the heat pump, they do the wiring, they have the proper sizing, they put in a heat pump water heater. And then that package of equipment, installation, and administering the program and marketing it is about $31,000 per customer per participant within the program.
So I'm trying to understand your proposed program was to offer that full $21,000 incentive to the customer for a heat pump? Or am I getting that?
The proposal is for the customer to have no dollars out of pocket. So if we say an incentive typically infers that the customer is paying something and then they get dollars back, or they get a discount on the equipment in some form or fashion. But the company's proposal is that there's no money out of pocket from the customer, and that the company or the company's contractor would come and install everything at no cost to the customer at all. So nothing out of pocket, and full installation of that system.
And if I understood the Rocky Ford pilot where the BE was proposed to happen, the costs to the gas company were just going to be the administrative costs of marketing, and then the electric company was going to be providing the incentives. Is that correct?
So I think we're mixing and matching a little bit here.
Okay.
So the 31,000 that I am referring to is part of the full electrification scenario as part of supplemental. So that's if the company did a full electrification program, that's what the projected and proposed cost would be per participant. Now, shifting to Rocky Ford, that is a little bit of a different situation and scenario. It's where the gas company is basically paying $40,000 per year for administrative costs. The electric company is also adding on another $80,000 per year for administrative and implementation costs. And then all of the incentive dollars are coming through the Colorado Energy Office as a result of federal dollars or federal funding coming through. So that's what the proposed Rocky Ford pilot is.
Okay. And with the cost benefit analysis on the both the full electrification and the Rocky Ford, you're looking at the full cost of the program, which would in the electrification case would be that full incentive. You're paying all the costs, and against the benefit relative to an 80% efficient furnace. Is that what I understood?
For the full electrification scenario, yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And for the Rocky Ford project, you're looking at the benefits of you're looking at again the full cost of electrification against the for that heat pump against the benefits, again the benefits of a heat pump against an 80% furnace. Is that correct?
So the calculation of Rocky Ford for cost effectiveness is a little bit different. And I think you'll notice that the carbon abatement costs for Rocky Ford are significantly better than the full electrification scenario. And the main reason is because those incentive dollars and all the installation is coming from basically outside of the state of Colorado, because it's coming from the federal government. So the bounds of our MTRC, from a societal perspective, society in our case is Colorado. Because the dollars are coming from the federal government, we typically loosely call those pennies from God. So those are just a benefit to, it's not an additional cost.
They're subtracted out of the cost. Okay.
Correct.
Gotcha.
So that's why it looks significantly better for Rocky. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. And so if the incentive that was offered by the company for full electrification was, say, half of what you proposed, say you were going to cover 50% of the cost of electrification, it was going to be 15,000 or so, because you thought the customer basically would get 50% off that electrification and they would go for that. Your cost benefit analysis wouldn't change. Is that correct?
No, it would. It would get better and increase, because I think if you recall yesterday we were talking about if you exceed the incremental cost, that counts as a cost within the calculation.
And you're looking incremental against the cost of an 80% furnace, or I think you told Commissioner Gilman you're looking at the incremental cost against an efficient furnace. Is that right?
So we're getting into a little bit of a different territory here because we calculated out as full cost of installation. So that's basically a different scenario. That's what we do for income qualified. When you have the full cost of installation covered by the company, that's what's included within the benefit cost analysis. If we then shifted it and let's say we covered 50%, I'd probably have to sit back and think about what we would compare the incremental cost to. I would assume it would be, again, versus a baseline furnace, the baseline furnace versus an efficient heat pump, make that differential and then see what was on top and use that. I'd have to think about it a little bit more, but I believe that's what we would do.
Okay. And just a final question on the weatherization sort of, R19, for example, insulation. When a customer goes to says, we're going to blow R19 into our house, is there an incremental basis there, or do you just look at the full, uh, going from basically 0 to R19, or are you looking at where they are now and then looking at the incremental?
So it depends on the situation. So I'll look at it in two ways. One would be retrofit an existing home, and second would be new construction. So for retrofit, I'd have to double check what the baseline is, but there's an assumed baseline value of what R is currently existing within those homes. A lot of that's based on saturation surveys and baselining data that we've collected either through federal government or through actual surveys of Colorado Gas customers. And then for retrofit, we would take the difference of what the assumed baseline is versus the efficient levels, like R19 or whatever value we were including in there. And we would take the delta, the spread of.
And you're talking about that calculation on the side of the benefit or on the side of the cost, or both?
Benefit. For installation, it would be on the side of the benefit. Because we're taking the difference of what's existing versus the new efficient of what we're replacing it with.
Okay, so the cost would be just basically 100%. There wouldn't be an incremental calculation there. So if you had
Exactly right.
If you had, for example, because we're not dealing with incremental on the cost side, if somebody did a $5,000 project to blow R19 insulation into their house, and you had $1,000 incentive to do that from the company, the cost effectiveness of that, if you change that to covering the full cost of that insulation, that cost effectiveness calculation wouldn't change, right? Because you're basing it off of
Correct.
that full.
Yep, that's exactly correct. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Cottrell, appreciate you joining us again this morning. And with that, we appreciate your time and you're free to go, sir. Oh, no, never mind. Never mind. Mr. Koshin will ask you some questions.
All the lawyers popped up at once.
I knew I was in trouble. I'm sorry. I was getting excited about moving along. All right, Mr. Koshin, redirect. Sorry about that.
No worries. Mr. Cottrell, you're asked a series of questions regarding the company's electrification modeling and SWEEP's electrification modeling. Can you describe the differences between the two modeling approaches?
Yeah, I think we've discussed this at length, but if we really stack it up and compare the two against each other, it comes down to the cost / incentive that it takes in order to entice customers to fuel switch and to go with full electrification, where the customer is assuming and modeling that it will take the full cost of installation, the full cost of equipment, administration, installation, in order to move a customer from their existing fuel and then to fuel switch to natural gas, which is relatively expensive given all the hurdles associated with convincing customers to fuel switch and to shift from what they currently existing have. Whereas SWEEP, they assume that, at least for market rate, that it would need approximately $2,000 incentive in order to move customers to go from their current fuel while keeping their backup system, and installing a high efficiency heat pump, basically on top of what they already have. So if someone already has a high efficiency, or excuse me, has a furnace, and then they want to electrify, Sweep's assuming that it'll be $2,000 to incentivize them to install a heat pump on top of what they already have. So that's what the main difference is, and the main spread between the carbon abatement costs, that the company is saying that it'll take significantly more to move customers in order to electrify. And Sweep's argument and position is that it'll be approximately, for a market rate, a $2,000 incentive in order to move customers and have electric heat on top of their existing heat for backup.
And what are the differences in the participation between the two models?
So Sweep assumes significantly higher participation. I believe it is about triple or higher in our electrification from our electrification scenario versus what Sweep has. I believe they have, if I'm not mistaken, about 6,000 participants over the course of the clean heat plan that's upcoming, in that range. So a significant amount of customers that they are assuming to convert from natural gas to electric, which is nothing that's really been seen in a lot of service territories of Colorado Gas's size.
You also had a discussion about the full costs of electrification as compared to the incremental differential. In your modeling, why not use the incremental differential between electric and gas equipment?
Yeah, so it's really a couple fold. The one is, as discussing with Commissioner Plant, is what is that cost in order to entice someone to fuel switch, in order to make that conscious decision to move off of what they existing have, and to go through that significant inconvenience and capital infrastructure investment in order to put that within their home. So the full cost is needed in order to move that customer, in order to have them make basically a non-economic decision to move over to full electrification. The second piece is that we are assuming that a customer will move to electrification, but on Sweep's side, they have assuming incremental costs and an incentive there, but they're keeping their gas furnace. At some point in the future, could be not too distant future, depending upon the age of their existing system, that equipment will also need to be replaced in potentially relatively near future in order to keep full heating year round. So would be an additional adjusted full cost or incremental cost, depending on what you looked at it, in Sweep side as well. So main reason is to cover the full equipment to move folks and to move the market. And that's what would be needed. Oh, you're on mute.
In terms of modeling, you were asked several questions about why the company chose to evaluate cold climate heat pumps, and you had a discussion regarding the Department of Energy's breakout of the country based on weather. Do you recall that conversation?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can we please pull up Hearing Exhibit 126 from the company's box folder? Mr. Cottrell, could you tell me what Hearing Exhibit 126 is?
Sure. So the Department of Energy actually has a really slick tool, actually developed by PNNL, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, to run through and determine whether a cold climate heat pump would be appropriate for you, depending upon your climate zone, your home size, heating needs, and it runs through an entire process in order to help customers or participants identify what the right heating source would be for them. So this map specifically represents one of the tabs within that tool for climate. And if you'll notice, it goes by climate zones 1 through 8, 1 being Southwest Florida or Southwest Texas being very hot and humid, all the way to Northern Alaska, subarctic and Arctic type temperatures and climate zones. Colorado, you'll notice, is basically all in zones 5, 6, and 7, which is designated cold and dry. So the central region are 6 and 7, extremely cold, which is really only comparable to northern Minnesota and northern Maine, basically almost Canada. And then the other zones are zone 5. The Department of Energy recommends anything 4 or above, so that central line of the United States in the yellow going across, then everything in green, blue, and purple, the darker colors. It's highly recommended that if you are going to be using electricity as your primary heating source, to use a cold climate heat pump and to use that technology in order to be able to have the heat pump be your primary heating source.
Commissioner Gilman, I would move for admission of hearing exhibit 126.
Any objections? Hearing none, so admitted.
It was also suggested that the GTI report may have been the basis for your modeling of electrification costs. Can you please describe what role the GTI report played with respect to your modeling?
Sure. So the GTI report was separate and independent from all clean heat plan modeling that was conducted by Scott Madden and by the company. So it was really used to help inform and maybe invalidate some of the information that we were calculating completely separately, but there were no inputs or assumptions that were used in the GTI report that then were translated and used in the clean heat plan modeling. So none of the outputs from the GTI report and their analysis was used as an input in the clean heat plan modeling.
And can we please pull up hearing exhibit 110? And if we can go down to page 14, please. Mr. Cottrell, looking at lines 2 through 4 there, can you clarify what is meant by that sentence?
Sure. So if folks recall from yesterday, Ms. Coleman asked me about comments that I made related to the GTI report and how it filtered into the modeling. And apologies, I believe some of my rebuttal testimony may have been a little bit unclear or misleading. But in lines 2 and 3, I think we were just describing that the GTI report is a sound modeled report and that it has valid and useful information. Then lines 3 and 4 state that it provides valid, useful data and information to help inform the company's BE modeling. So it was used strictly as that. It helped inform, it validated, it was used as a side independent analysis that was consistent with company modeling, but it was not used as any inputs. It was just used to help inform some company positions and information, but nothing more than that. You're speaking on mute, Mr. Koshin.
Apologize for that. You also had a discussion regarding new construction and the possibility of using incentives for line extensions. Do you recall that discussion?
I do.
And what are DSM incentives used for with respect to new construction?
DSM incentives are used strictly for energy efficiency measures within the home. There's no line extension incentives or any cost going towards that. So only for DSM measures that are going to be installed within each individual home.
Thank you. You were asked about the Rocky Ford pilot incentive levels for Black Hills Colorado Electric LLC. Do you recall that discussion?
Yes, I do.
Can we please pull up hearing exhibit 131 from the company's box folder? And Mr. Cottrell, could you tell me what this is?
This is the settlement agreement for for Colorado Electric's BE Plan 1 that covered program years 2023 to 2025.
And does this document deal with the Rocky Ford pilot project?
It does. It's the one titled Whole Home Electrification Pilot.
Perfect. Commissioner Gilman, I would move for admission of hearing exhibit 131.
Any objections? So moved.
Thank you. And finally, can we please pull up hearing exhibit 520?
The executable?
Either one. I
Okay.
won't go into great detail.
Okay. I'm just going to pull up their PDF version, but if you need the spreadsheet, I can grab that as well.
Commissioner Gilman asked you about backup calculations for the beneficial electrification tables in hearing exhibit 519. You would agree
Yes.
that the backup calculations are included in the executable version of hearing exhibit 520?
Yes, I would agree.
Thank you, commissioners. No further questions from Mr. Cottrell.
All right, now, Mr. Cottrell, now you're free to go. Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah. Chairman, do you want to be in charge again?
Sure. Thanks for your help, Commissioner Gilman. Greatly appreciated. The next one on my list is Mr. Hagland. Mr. Hagland, you out there?
I'm here, Chair. Can you, seems like my video is having trouble. Can you see me?
Yep, we can hear and see you. Can you hold up your right hand, Mr. Hagland? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Put your hand down. Is anybody with you or communicating with you in any way?
No.
If that changes, will you let us know?
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners, and the acting Chair, Commissioner Gilman. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Hagland. Could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Eric Hagland, ERIC. Last name is HAGLUND.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the Colorado Public Utilities Commission as the section head of the economics team.
And did you cause to be filed what has been marked as Exhibit 201 in this proceeding? That was your answer testimony, as well as, and I'll refer to hearing Exhibit 204, which is the second settlement testimony that you provided. Did you provide that testimony?
Yes.
And if I were to ask you the questions contained in that testimony again here today, would your answers remain the same?
Yes.
And were you a participant in the settlement negotiations resulting in what is being called the second settlement agreement in this proceeding?
Yes.
And you represented trial staff, I assume, in those discussions?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And do you have any corrections to offer to your testimony today?
No.
Okay. With that, Mr. Hagland is available for questions.
Commissioner Gilman.
Great. Good morning, Mr. Hagland.
Good morning, Commissioner Gilman.
Just a few for you. So first, with regard to the electrification study that was added to the second settlement agreement, you're familiar with that provision, I presume?
Yes.
So SWEEP's second settlement testimony identified that they don't believe another study on this topic is likely to provide new information or move the needle in a meaningful way. So I was curious, as a response to that, what kind of new information or direction do you expect specifically that an electrification study as outlined in the second settlement agreement would achieve?
I think the hope is that that study provides some actual empirical evidence of efforts to of what costs and potential benefits are available for BE in specifically in Black Hills service territory. I think that, I mean, as has been discussed already at length in testimony and at this hearing, I think both Black Hills and Sweep provided some analysis of this. They're obviously quite far apart from each other. I think there are reasonable criticisms to be made of both approaches. And I think the hope is that a study focused specifically on Black Hills and its service territory might bring the range of estimated costs and benefits closer together.
Okay, so do you see it primarily kind of as a, I don't want to say mathematical exercise, but like an exercise to identify reasonable assumptions and calculation methods, or do you see it as a farther reaching effort than that?
I think we're thinking of it more in the former category of, it's mostly about refining the technical assumptions that could go into that type of analysis, but also potentially giving Black Hills some more insight into what it would take to implement such a program, hopefully responding to some of the criticisms of the modeling and the assumptions they made in their testimony in this proceeding.
Okay, thanks. So if that's kind of the main focus of the study and the report, I just wanted to talk briefly about two different areas where Black Hills raises significant concerns to see, in your view, if those concerns will be addressed or in any way made progress on through this electrification study. So first, they point to kind of the difficulties of overlapping with 23 different electric utilities, to some extent understanding carbon emissions, any other coordination that may be necessary. And so do you see that as a focus of the study or something in which you expect significant progress to be made in the study?
I'm not sure that we thought specifically that issue was, I mean, it's not identified in the settlement as a topic for study. We certainly wouldn't oppose if that were an interest of Black Hills in sort of how they wanted to structure the study. I think we could definitely, I'll say we could likely agree that that's a good use of those resources. But it's hard to say exactly. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in saying specifically what we would like to see or not like in that study, given that at this point in time, it's kind of conceptual in nature. It has a budget available for it. And I think parties were very deliberate in wanting to use the exact language that the commission had approved for another utility for a similar study. So we didn't want to prescribe too much in the settlement language. Okay.
And not to torture you again, but just one other angle on also making you hypothesize about other things that could be included. As I'm sure you're familiar, the company brings up significant policy and legal concerns with offering any beneficial electrification at all. And I'm curious to what degree you see the study addressing those specifically.
Well, I don't really want to comment on the legal concerns, and we haven't, we have not endorsed any sort of suggestion about legal arguments in our testimony. As far as the policy considerations, I mean, I think there are still potential opportunities, I think I mentioned in my settlement testimony, my second settlement testimony, that it does, whatever the legal arguments aside, I think Black Hills does not appear to have an incentive to implement a program like this, a large scale implementation, a large scale electrification program that SWEEP is advocating for. Potential there are policy levers to change their incentives around something like that.
Okay.
So it's possible that the information that comes out of the study could clarify a path towards greater incentivization of the utility.
Okay. And if it didn't, hypothetically, and if you were just looking at kind of some of those mathematical and basis questions of how should we calculate, where should we get the information, what's kind of a fair approach, do you, well, I guess you can't speak for the company. I'm just concerned, given the company's policy and legal arguments, that even if that report were to show us cost effective, I'm not clear at all how we end up in a different place with the core arguments being made in this proceeding. So I don't know if you agree with me there or have similar concerns. Trying to ensure every dollar spent is actually useful. And I have some concerns that if we don't address some of these core issues, any calculations are not actually achieving something different.
Yeah, I agree that that's a cause for concern. It may be the case that the study provides additional information and Black Hills still does not have an interest in implementing a program like this. I can't speak for them. Just given where this proceeding sits procedurally, we thought this was a possible path forward, given that the previous settlement had not included anything beyond the Rocky Ford pilot, and the commission was not satisfied with that limited exploration of BE. We thought this was a path forward that we could, at least the settling parties, could agree to.
Okay, appreciate that. Good segue to Rocky Ford. So do you see kind of the electrification pilot in Rocky Ford and experience gained there by Black Hills as an important part of the settlement agreement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's both additional study on the potential, what you've been referring to as sort of the numbers, the math involved, the technical assumptions that would hopefully come out of additional study, but also the experience and the implementation side in doing a small pilot in Rocky Ford, I think could be valuable.
Okay. And then based on testimony yesterday and today, I understand the Rocky Ford pilot to be basically there's some kind of administrative and outreach funding perhaps through the two utilities involved, but that the actual rebates and funding for the electrification for the work were intended to entirely come from the federal government. Do you have the same general understanding of the funding apparatus there? I guess from the federal government through CEO. I don't know if that detail matters.
Yeah, I was listening to some of that conversation yesterday. I'm not intimately familiar with that. I know that there's another aspect of outside of the federal support. There was part of this approved in the electric DSM and BE proceeding that I was not a witness in that proceeding, so I don't remember the details or know exactly what was approved there. So I do understand this to be what's being presented here to be intended as kind of a supplement to other sources of funding that have been approved in at least one other proceeding, and then also there's kind of the federal funding side that is outside of the commission.
Okay. And so you wouldn't have any understanding as to the likelihood of the federal funding to execute the pilot?
No, I don't have any understanding about that.
Okay. Do you have any understanding if there's any kind of contingency plan or understanding amongst the parties as part of the settlement agreement if this pilot kind of falls apart or needs to be significantly reimagined if federal funding is no longer available?
I don't, it, you know, as you've seen, there's nothing specifically addressing that in the settlement. I don't believe any parties testified about that in testimony supporting the settlement. So beyond what's in there, I'm not aware of sort of additional preparations that have made for that contingency.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know about you as a party. I certainly didn't really appreciate until yesterday that it seems as though nearly the entirety of that effort relies on achieving federal funding. So I didn't know if that was news to you and you had any thoughts on that related to the expectations around that pilot.
No, that was also news to me, I'll say. Yeah.
Okay. Couple questions on DSM. Given that you probably know better than I do, if the company has been hitting their DSM goals for gas for the past several years, what's your understanding on their recent years performance with relationship to their goals?
I actually have not been very involved in there's a currently pending gas DSM case where I think a lot of that has come up. And I'm not, I've sort of been pretty distant from that proceeding. So I understand that the company has raised the concern that sort of efficiency standards have made it more difficult for them to achieve sort of commission DSM goals. But I don't actually know, I couldn't say as I sit here sort of where they've come in relative to their targets.
Okay. If the company has not been achieving their targets, and it sounded like from Mr. Cottrell, there could be certain programs that could use a bit of the additional Clean Heat Plan DSM funding, but in the macro perspective, they have likely not been exceeding their budgets, whereby they would then go to using this additional DSM funding allocated from the Clean Heat Plan. So I guess in a situation where that doesn't happen, it seems as though I'm trying to figure out where the parties gain confidence that the greenhouse gas reductions will actually occur in DSM when the DSM programs currently are not fully subscribed.
Yeah, that's difficult to answer. I'm trying to recall what the conversations about these topics happened quite some time ago. And I don't recall exactly what was said around this. So I'm sorry, I don't think I have much specific to add on that. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a better answer for you, but I think I'll say that in providing the second settlement agreement, I won't speak for other parties, but it became clear that it was going to be quite difficult. It was difficult to change specific items in that without the whole thing falling apart. And our approach was to keep as much of the original settlement intact as was possible, sort of adjusted for the time that had passed and the 2-year plan versus a 3-year plan and those types of things. So I'll say that we didn't revisit a lot of the things that had already sort of been the building blocks of the original settlement, which I would include your question as relating to that.
Okay. And then with regard to the commission's expressed concerns in the prior deliberation about incentivizing gas heating equipment. I just wanted to talk more specifically about the possibility of providing DSM rebates for essentially like for like replacements. So in that case, in those instances, do you understand any actual greenhouse gas savings to be available or induced by the measure if we're replacing a like for like for a gas plant?
Yeah, I didn't provide any of staff's testimony on the greenhouse gas emissions. I believe that Mr. Lemaire, I don't know that he addressed the specific question you're asking about, but I know he looked more specifically at the emissions accounting side. So I don't, in terms of sort of what is compliant with the emissions workbook, which the commission approved in the rulemaking. I believe what's proposed in the settlement is consistent with what's in the rulebook, but beyond that, I can't comment on sort of how the specific equipment affects the accounting.
Okay. I mean, I guess intuitively, if you replace equipment with the same efficiency equipment, are there savings there?
No, the way you're describing it doesn't sound like there would be. I just am reluctant to comment on the account, how those are supposed to be accounted for in the workbook.
Okay. And then just kind of similarly intuitively on new construction, if we're incentivizing measures that are, at least in certain locations, required by code, I was just curious if staff has any perspective on if those represent actual incremental or additional savings as a result of the Clean Heat Plan or DSM associated with it.
No, I don't have any additional comments on that.
Okay. And then just some questions on the thermal energy study. I know you had identified in your second settlement testimony that thermal energy is now specifically listed as a statutory clean heat resource. For the thermal energy study as part of the second settlement agreement, do you have a firm understanding as to plans for kind of a working group similar to what was suggested for the electrification study to help provide and vet input and assumptions as part of the thermal energy study?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I don't think that there's a settlement provision about a working group around that, but there. I mean, I believe it was the intent and the spirit of the negotiation around that proposal that it be a collaborative effort, and that that parties were interested in working with other statewide efforts to promote thermal networks. So as I sit here, I can't refer you to a specific settlement provision about that, but my understanding is that's consistent with the intent of that electrification study would be that it would be collaborative, and that the company would try to align with other statewide efforts on that topic.
Okay. And really just one last question, I think. With regard to the thermal energy networks, I talked with the company yesterday about that study and about, some of the expectations around siting, around calculations. And I think it was Mr. Harrington had brought up that, probably the structure of it matters in terms of their involvement and any perceived cross-subsidization. So I was just curious if you envision part of the thermal energy study as looking at kind of the ownership and operating and investment structures related to it, or if you really see it as just kind of technical and siting feasibility. A similar kind of question and concerns as with the electrification study. I'm trying to understand if we address Black Hill's core concerns that, a host of new technical data may not solve.
Yeah, I am again a little bit hesitant to address that. I think other parties provide a lot more detail on what they envision, or sort of what the initial idea for studying additional thermal energy networks would be, and I think there may be settlement testimony from other parties that provide more clarity about expectations around that. So it frankly wasn't a huge part of our. I don't think we offered much testimony at all on that issue or that proposal. I think we support it as part of the comprehensive resolution of issues here. But I don't know specifically that ownership models or that type of thing would necessarily be a part of the study.
Okay. Those are my only questions, Mr. Haglund. Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Plant?
I have no questions.
Just one question, Mr. Haglund. Any thoughts about instead of doing the study, shifting that money over to maybe expanding the electrification, beneficial electrification pilot outside and beyond Rocky Ford? And it seems like that could potentially get an earlier read on the policy concerns that the company is raising and that Commissioner Gilman raised with you. And given that the real barriers to this don't necessarily seem to be the benefit cost analysis, but more, company financial incentives, and the subsidization issues Mr. Harrington raised, it seems like that could move us forward more quickly than the study. So any thoughts on that as a potential outcome in this case?
So if I understand your idea correctly, you're talking about using the $300,000 that's budgeted for the electrification study to expand the Rocky Ford electrification pilot. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
We support the settlement that includes the electrification study. So I understand the commission's interest in considering other ideas, but we do support the sort of combination of the pilot as proposed and agreed upon in the settlement and the electrification study.
All right. Assume for purposes of this question that the commission doesn't and wants to go down this alternative path of doing an electrification study, of shifting the money towards a pilot. Any guidance or concerns you could raise if we wanted to go down that path to help us do it better, with a full understanding that it's not your position in this case?
I think I would refer to the point that I made briefly in my settlement testimony about that buy-in from the utility is an essential part of not only a large-scale BE program, but even a pilot. I mean, I think the commission can order the company to do a lot of things, but if the commission orders Black Hills to do something that they're clearly opposed to doing or have no incentive to do, I don't know that you're going to get a successful pilot that gives you the information you want out of it. I think that I would be reluctant to allocate funding towards something that doesn't seem to be set up to be a successful pilot. That would be my concern.
Well, I hear that. That's was always my concern with the SWEEP proposal, but at least it would resolve the legal and policy issues. And if the third-party implementation models or something else came along down the pike, we'd be way further along to move forward. So any reaction to that thought about resolving the legal and policy issues now instead of waiting another 2 years and then
I'm not going to comment on how the potential resolution of the legal issues is I don't know that yeah, I won't comment on I think you'll see plenty of you'll see plenty of SOP positions on the legal issues, and I'm not qualified to comment on that. And I don't even understand exactly the potential timing of where those things might be resolved. So I guess I would say, as to the policy considerations, I don't know that I don't know how helpful it would be to go through the exercise of having an unsuccessful pilot, just to demonstrate that a utility that is clearly opposed to implementing a type of programming is unlikely to be successful in implementing it.
That's all I had, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start, Mr. Hagland. I just have a couple of redirect very, very briefly. Given that we're this far into the proceeding, Mr. Hagland, is it your understanding that any emissions are being reduced today as we sit here by the company by through a clean heat plan?
Not as a result of a clean heat plan, no.
And is it your understanding from the second settlement of the electrification study? I think we've heard at some point that that's a mirror of the provisions in the Atmos settlement. Do I have that right?
That's correct. The settlement language is very closely taken from the Commission's decision approving a similar program for Atmos Energy.
And you prefaced my second part of that question that this was that settlement was approved by this commission. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in your experience, I think you alluded to this in one of your responses. Are programs, in staff's opinion, are programs generally more effective when they're ordered from a top down, or when they're built from a position of consensus, just overall?
I think a consensus-based approach, when possible, it tends to work better.
And would you say that position is sort of what reinforces staff's position as it pertains to the second settlement agreement in this proceeding?
That was certainly a consideration for us. Yes.
And then if you recall, Commissioner Gilman asked you a question regarding the thermal energy study. And I believe, Ms. Kunkel, can we bring up hearing exhibit 122? That's the second settlement agreement, Rev 1, just really quickly. I think this will help clear something up. And if we can go down to paragraph 31, I believe it's around page 12. I hope I have that right. Paragraph 34, so down just a little farther there. Yeah, there we go. And if we could just show it so we can see the rest of paragraph 34 there on the next page as well. Mr. Hagland, in this paragraph, do you see there in the middle, it says something, CG agrees to feasibility study, and does that include, it says there that it includes an outreach for stakeholders, correct?
Yes, that's what it says. Thank you for reminding me.
Sure. So I really only bring this up just to make sure that there is a stakeholder provision, as I understand it, included in that thermal energy study, if I have that right, correct?
Yes, that is what's in that paragraph.
Perfect. And Ms. Kunkel, you can take this down. I don't need it. So I guess I think, well, I think that's the only questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Mr. Hagland. As always, appreciate you, and you may be excused.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gilman, did you have questions for Mr. Hay? I see Mr. Hay standing by.
Right there.
Mr. Hay, can you hold up your right hand? Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Put your hand down. Is anybody with you or communicating with you in any way?
No, Chairman, there may be a contractor showing up at some point. I can't predict that. My apologies, but otherwise, no.
And if the contractor gives you advice about what to say in this proceeding, will you let us know?
I would do that, though I don't anticipate it. He's just fixing the roof.
All right. With that, Mr. Bonas.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Hay.
Good morning, Mr. Banis.
Would you please state and spell your name for the record?
My name is Keith Hay. The spelling on the first name is Keith. Spelling on the last name is Hay.
Thank you. And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm Managing Director of Policy at the Colorado Energy Office.
And you didn't actually cause any testimony to be filed in this proceeding, did you?
That is correct. I did not. I am adopting the testimony of the Energy Office witness Jocelyn Durkay. She has taken another job and has left the Energy Office.
And just for the record, you're referring to her answer testimony, hearing exhibit 400, and her cross-answer testimony, hearing exhibit 401. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is there anything that you would change with either of those testimonies?
There is not.
All right. Mr. Hay is available for questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Gilman.
Good morning, Mr. Hay.
Good morning, Commissioner Gilman. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for your willingness to join us. I do appreciate it. These questions will sound pretty familiar to what I asked Mr. Haglund, so I may cut out, all of the details. I presume you know what I'm talking about. You heard me just ask him. So first of all, with regard to the electrification study, trying to understand to what degree it's CEO's understanding that some of the main policy, legal, or coordination with electric utility issues that the company really points to as their main apprehension around electrification, trying to understand to what extent, if any, those topics are anticipated to play a major role in that electrification study.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman. And I did see your discussion with Mr. Haglund, so I'm familiar with the questions that you and Chair Blank asked him. As we think about it, it is the goal of the study was to set up a process for the parties in this proceeding to really, I think, as both the Black Hills witness and Mr. Haglund laid out, get to a place where we agree on the assumptions and the inputs for the technical modeling so that we then begin to understand what the impact of that modeling means from an implementation standpoint for electrification. I do think that there are, as you've pointed out, policy and legal questions, but I don't think that a study is necessarily the appropriate process to try and resolve those issues. The Energy Office in this proceeding and in others has advocated that the commission open a non-adjudicated proceeding to take up some of those issues. And I think that could be appropriate for a number of reasons. One, they are not unique or specific to Black Hills. And so I think trying to take on policy and legal questions that need to be addressed for all of the gas LDCs, as well as for non-jurisdictional utilities in the context of a study for one relatively smaller gas utility, is probably not a fruitful exercise. Two, in my mind, it is probably not fruitful because those issues are ones that there is, as this case makes clear, a relatively deep-seated disagreement about. I think the study will be much more productive trying to get to a really solid baseline on the modeling assumptions so that we can move forward beginning to understand what the costs and benefits of beneficial electrification might look like to help inform that broader policy and legal discussion whenever the commission chooses to take it up.
Okay, so to my understanding, then you're kind of in the first camp that this study will focus primarily on those assumptions and calculation methods and mathematics. But it sounds like you're articulating those are not of full use or value until the legal and policy questions are addressed.
I might put that the other way, that the policy and the legal questions probably depend on the outcome of the study in some way. I don't know that it would be fruitful, for example, to order an action that turned out to have significantly negative consequences for customers. And, we can't know that a priori. So again, the goal of the study is to get to a place where hopefully the parties to the settlement at sweep can agree on a set of input assumptions that result in solid modeling for Black Hills. As I articulated, I think there's a separate process that needs to address those legal questions and policy questions as well.
Okay. With regard to Rocky Ford, just trying to understand, you might have as good of insight as anyone to understand the status of apparently the federal funding that was really intended to finance the lion's share of that project. So just curious, first of all, if you have any update on that federal funding, and secondly, how you view, the likelihood of achievement of that policy, of that pilot.
Yeah. So two questions there. Let me take the first one about the status of the funding, and was aware that this was an issue throughout the course of the proceeding, and so I've had a chance to talk with the team that actually is leading both of those federal efforts. Those dollars are fully obligated to the Energy Office, and we are getting very close to being able to open the door on those programs. So that's about $140 million across the two programs. The Home Electrification Appliance Rebate Program, or HERE, and then the Home Efficiency Rebate Program, or HER, and it's about $70 million in each program. I was also able to confirm with the staff overseeing both of those programs that the incentives that would come through those federal programs are able to be stacked with state, local, and federal incentives as well, with one provision that the combination of incentives cannot exceed the full value of the project cost. So there is a cap there. So, depending on how all of those dollars were to stack up, it can't go above 100, so to speak. In terms of the efficacy of the pilot, I remain optimistic. But I think that there are always a couple of challenges, especially with electrification, and this is one of those things in this proceeding that I think we've tried to articulate that is an unknown. And that is, we don't know from the customer's perspective what a transition from gas to electric space heating would look like. Because we don't know what the other utility is and what that utility's rate structure looks like. So, we will certainly work with Black Hills to do all we can to help make customers aware of the pilot, to help make customers aware of the opportunity, and to work with them to understand the benefits of electric space heating. But at the end of the day, it really is up to the customers to take action based on what they see as their best interest. And that may be economic, it may be environmental, it may be a combination of things. And so that's where I think we will learn a lot as we go forward with this pilot, is what customers really do respond to and what their interest levels are in shifting to gas alternatives, whether that's for heating, water heating, or cooking.
Okay. And does the Energy Office have any role in kind of the outreach related to that program, or you're just kind of helping with the pass-through funding from the federal source?
Yeah. Again, this is all sort of subject to moving forward with the program, but we are intending to do outreach on our side. And my understanding from talking with the team is that will be coordinated with Black Hills as well.
Okay, got it. And then as you had said, this funding is fully obligated to you. is this specifically earmarked just for the Rocky Ford pilot, or are there other kind of competing or competitive tensions as far as, if this money is not, if customers are not signed up relatively quickly, might this money go to other uses?
Yeah. I can say that it is not all obligated to the Rocky Ford pilot. I think $140 million for the Rocky Ford pilot would probably be in excess of 100% of the budget for that pilot. This really is a statewide effort. I would need to come back to the commission with the exact details around how money would be moved into the program and whether or not money might be moved out of the program if there were no uptake. My sense is that because we haven't gotten the program fully up off the ground yet, though we are very close, that those issues may not have been fully decided, and that we would probably try to have some flexibility in regard to that.
Okay.
But it is our intent to work with Black Hills through the course of the Rocky Ford pilot on helping to fund that initiative.
Okay, got it. Same two questions on the thermal energy study. Just curious if you have a sense as to if that will be a broader working group approach that can help to vet some of those assumptions and citing with regard to the feasibility. That's the first question. Kind of more akin to what we see in terminology for the electrification study.
Yeah. I don't believe that the settlement agreement really articulated the process for the development of that study. The Energy Office would certainly be open to participating with Black Hills and other stakeholders in a study of that type. We have done work similar to that with Excel, both through a proceeding around the potential for thermal alternatives in the steam system in the downtown Denver area. We've also done similar work with the company in terms of thinking about how to solicit local government interest in non-gas alternatives through the implementation of 1370. So we would certainly welcome that opportunity, but I think that's something that we would need to work out going forward.
Okay, got it. And curious if you envision that study as touching on any, like primarily feasibility in terms of like technical feasibility and perhaps some costing, or do you anticipate that that study would at all endeavor into kind of the business models and operations kind of side of things where I think we were still hearing some concerns around understanding better from Black Hills?
Yeah, I don't want to opine really on Black Hills' concerns about what the statute does or does not provide in terms of, the utilities business model. I think that, the way we have thought about it, it really is much more of a technical study in that sense of, could you implement thermal energy, whether that's on an individual building basis or a thermal energy network basis? Would there be an opportunity to engage with interested local governments to do that? What would it mean for the customers? What would it mean, customers taking up the thermal energy? What would it mean for the utility in terms of, needing to stand that up and the investment that they would need to make? And therefore, what would it mean to the broader class of ratepayers as well? If the commission were interested in the legal issues, I think that that's something that the commission could add to that non-adjudicated proceeding, looking at gas alternatives. But again, much more of a technical study in that way.
Okay. And then, so my understanding, the Colorado Energy Office has an online tool, which is a map showing statewide building code adoption by county and municipality. Is that accurate?
Yes, I believe that is accurate. I am not the person who oversees that work, but yes.
Okay, but that broadly shows the version of the IECC that many of the counties and municipalities within the state are currently using.
Correct. Although, in talking with the individual that manages that program, there is, of course, a bit of a disconnect in that, utility service territories do not always neatly align with those boundaries. And so one utility may have part of one jurisdiction and not part of another. So just
Sure.
they're
Yeah,
they're
this is why
they're
you just,
valuable, but only so valuable as we think about that, because there is that disconnect between the
sure.
political
This is
divisions.
displayed by municipal boundary, not by utility boundary.
Correct. Actually, yes, I believe it is municipal boundaries. I was
County
trying to
and
think if it
municipal.
was, yep.
Okay, cool. Those are my only questions, Mr. Hay. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman.
Commissioner Plant.
I have no questions at this time.
Thanks, Commissioner Plant. Mr. A, just the same question I've been asking Mr. Hagland. Any advice or concerns if we were to shift the $300,000 for the study to expanding the Rocky Ford pilot maybe to one other community in the service territory?
I appreciate the question, Commissioner Blank, and I think I share a lot of the sentiments of Mr. Haglund. You know, at the end of the day, I think that it really is a question of what is the outcome towards which the commission is driving. It's very clear that Black Hills is currently opposed to implementing electrification. And I think if the goal is to get to a place where we have a clean heat plan that we can move forward with and implement and begin making progress on emissions reductions, it's probably not optimal to pull the money from that study and push it into a different community, which I think may frustrate that goal of getting to a plan that can be implemented. You know, I think if the long run question of where we go with Black Hills or a gas cell DC and electrification is one that the commission wants to address, as I shared in my conversation with Commissioner Gilman, Chair Blank, I think that that's probably best done in conversation with all of the gas utilities, the electric utility, and ideally the non-jurisdictional electric utilities as well, to really understand the legal, then the technical and the policy issues that would arise from something like that. So I really, you know, at the end of the day, and I will be completely frank with you, I don't think it's a good idea. And that may be bold, and I'm certainly stepping out on my skis there. I think that this is a carefully crafted settlement among the parties that really takes valuable incremental steps towards gas alternatives through an electrification study, an electrification pilot, and a thermal energy network study, a thermal energy study, and gets us to a place where we can begin to implement something that can work towards achieving emissions reductions.
Thanks, Mr. Bonas. Redirect.
No redirect, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hay. Appreciate you coming down.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick break till 11 and we'll come back. Do you have questions for Ms. Henry Sermis, Commissioner Gilman?
Very brief if she's available. If she's not available, I understand.
I see her. So we'll start with, there she is, UCA at 11.
So we'll wait till after the break.
Yeah. Thanks. Ms. Henry Sermos, can you hold up your right hand? Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
You can put your hand down. Is anybody with you or communicating with you in any way?
No,
That changes. Will you let us know?
I will.
Thanks. Back to you, Mr. Dixon.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Henry Sermos. I understand you prefer to go by Ms. Sermos for purposes of questioning. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And could you just for the record spell the three parts of your name?
Leslie, Leslie, Henry, Henry, Sermos, Sermos.
And can you describe?
You might change the label on your name. I think that would make it easier for everybody. So anyway, keep going.
There's been like changes, you know, when I became a US citizen, I was suggested by my counsel to adopt my husband's last name. And there's where the Sermos comes from, but all my documents now are under Sermos. So I will permanently change that, and that will be the last time I will ask to do any more changes to my last name.
Sorry, Mr. Dixon.
All right, thank you. Now, Ms. Sermos, did you cause to be prepared here in Exhibit 300, which is entitled The Answer Testimony of Leslie Henry Sermos?
That's correct.
And it also had 10 attachments to it that you provided. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have any corrections or modifications to that testimony that are necessarily to be made?
No.
And if I were to ask you these questions, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
All right. Ms. Sermos is available for commissioner questions.
Commissioner Gilman.
Hi, good morning, Ms. Sermos.
Hi, Commissioner Gilman. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So with regard to the electric, I trust you've been listening to the.
I have. Today I have, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'll only ask you things you heard recently today. So with regard to the electrification study, you know, really, some of what I've been trying to ask the other witnesses is really understanding if we're getting the full use out of the $300,000 for the electrification study, especially if the company kind of retains their main legal and policy and utility overlap concerns. And so certainly I think this is a reasonable question for you all as the consumer advocate to ensure we're getting the most out of any investment in a study like that. So, you know, maybe first of all, do you anticipate any of those issues being addressed in the study? And then my second part is, you know, what gives you confidence this is money well spent if these issues linger?
Okay, so I will start with the second part of your question first. Is it money well spent? We believe that it is, because as we've indicated in other proceedings, we have questioned the levels of adoption or the capacity of adoption of any of these programs, any NPAs, DSM and BE programs. And I think that any study that we can do that could give us a better idea of how we can better implement those programs or what the actual interest of the public is in these programs is money well spent. In that regard, we think it is. We understand that this study has some limitations since it's mostly to understand the cost effectiveness of and the conditions to do whole home BE, but we believe that it is necessary to understand to the extent what is the public interest in these measures.
Okay, thank you. And so it sounds like some of the issues you want solved or information you want better understood is around like customer interest and adoption, and what are rational inputs for those. I think a lot of people share your interest. So I'm curious, does this study assume, or do you anticipate it would assume some like public facing portion where we get an unbiased survey or a study to really understand customer sentiments better?
I understand that the specifics of the study are not very well delineated within the second settlement. However, I believe that any information is important to be acquired, and I would hope, and it does have a process of socialization with the stakeholders. So within that process, I would hope to be able to try to make a push for obtaining that information, and also have good communication with the communities that it's going to reflect, and therefore be able to understand more of that public interest that we want to have reflected also in the study.
Okay. And now kind of a hypothetical question, adjudicated public services clean heat plan, beneficial electrification was among the more cost effective of the options. So if we kind of use that to infer, let's assume we do this study, and what if it shows BE is cost effective? If the company continues to object on the legal and policy grounds, as well as some integration grounds, then is this money well spent? Yes, we got a technical answer. Did we move any closer to resolution in a clean heat plan of what the company should move forward with?
You're getting into a little bit of the territory of the chairman's question earlier to the prior witnesses. And I think that it is important to have this information. I think as many tools as we can have under a clean heat plan belt is a good thing to have. However, how much more? I'm not expecting to have information of how much more this company can actually do, but how much people are willing to commit to adopting electrification for heating systems or for any other BE program. That's more what I'm hoping to see, more than a push for the company to do more BE. I don't believe that's the intention of the study. If it were to show high interest, I think that is a good thing to have in general for any of the efforts that we're working for here in other clean heat plans. However, I don't think it should be the tool that is used to require the company to do more BE in other communities that are beyond its gas service territory.
Okay. So it's sounding like your interest is in this information kind of in a much broader sense, perhaps statewide, to understand the situation even more so than say just specific to Black Hills Service Territory?
I think this is what we've been trying to say also in other proceedings, even in the Mountain Energy Project. We indicated there was a study done there, and the results of that study were questionable, but I think we do need to have a larger state effort to see what adoption levels are the reality, and maybe do it as an independent study, not just conducted by the companies that we're trying to shift towards electrification, but maybe in an independent manner to have non-biased information, as you were indicating. Yes.
Okay, thanks. And as I understand it, one of the kind of parties' concerns perhaps with the ongoing litigation here is that technically no CHP is in place, so we may be missing out on savings right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, especially with the lion's share of the planning around DSM and those DSM programs not being fully subscribed, I'm curious what gives you confidence that the savings numbers we're looking at in the plan or in the portfolio are what would be actual when it's only the company's plan to spend that money if they exceed budgets in the existing DSM plan?
I think that we believe that we are all trying to do our best effort here in what our proposal is. We try to limit also the budget for the clean heat plan here. It was a proposal that we also had in public service to try to get a better sense of what the company can actually achieve. We don't know exactly what that is yet. We have some idea based on other proceedings, such as the DSM-SI proceedings, of what the companies can achieve. But it's something that we're hoping and we're striving to do based on the legislative order. And within that, I think that we're trying to work with a manageable budget to see if we can get manageable results.
Okay. And good segue into DSM and understanding that the budget is constrained in terms of what we're willing to do, only achieving kind of a portion of the legislative targets, basically, in the projections. So I'm curious, especially with regard to, say, the potential for replacing like-for-like equipment. Do you see that as a good use of DSM funds within the clean heat plan, if that were, permitted to be done?
Yeah, I think any replacement for either more efficient equipment or appliances is not just beneficial for the system, but it's also beneficial for customers. And as part of our order to try to promote the public interest, as part of our mission, we are intending to provide as much benefit as possible while maintaining affordability. So I think like for like, as long as we are able to manage those budgets and it doesn't become an extreme burden on ratepayers, we're moving forward to also trying to achieve our state decarbonization goals. Yes.
What progress exactly is made to a state decarbonization goal in replacing like-for-like equipment?
In this proceeding, based from Clean Heat, I don't think we've implemented this Clean Heat plan, so therefore I don't believe that there's been any emissions reductions or anything that can be attributed to this Clean Heat plan yet.
Well, I'm just saying hypothetically, like if you have a DSM program where you allow like-for-like replacement on, say, like gas equipment, what progress toward environmental goals is being made? Like what energy savings can be accounted for in that transaction?
I have not been part of the previous Black Hills DSM proceedings, so I would not like to give you inaccurate information or a response to that question.
Okay, got it. Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Plank. Questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Nor do I. Redirect for Ms. Sermos, Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Your Honor. No, I have no redirect for Ms. Sermos. Thank you.
You may be excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Brandt, you out there? Can you hold up your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Put your hand down. Is anybody with you or communicating with you in any way?
No.
That changes. Will you let us know?
I will.
Back to you, Mr. Hyatt.
Good morning, Mr. Brandt. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Justin Brandt, B-R-A-N-T.
Who are you currently employed by and in what capacity?
I'm currently employed as a senior manager at Current Energy Group.
Just for clarity here, when you appeared in the first hearing, in this case last year, were you employed by SWEEP?
I was.
And when did you move from SWEEP to Current Energy Group?
In July of this year.
And so in your new role at Current Energy Group, you're continuing to testify on behalf of SWEEP in this proceeding, right?
That's correct.
So did you file answer testimony, cross-answer testimony, and second settlement testimony in this case?
I did.
Okay, for the record, Mr. Brandt's pre-filed testimony has already been admitted into evidence, and Mr. Brandt is available for cross-examination.
Mr. Koshin, I got 45 minutes.
We will be able to do it a little bit quicker than that. Good morning, Mr. Brandt.
Good morning.
Let's jump into the sweep portfolio. It consists of just DSM and electrification, correct?
That's correct. Can you speak up a little? You're a little soft on my end.
Do apologize. I may be able to turn up some control here.
It's not too bad,
I'll
but just if you can speak up a tiny bit, that would be really helpful.
You bet. You would agree with me that in order to achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions, both DSM and electrification are dependent on customer adoption, correct?
Yes.
And the customer would be required to agree to the installation of the electrification measure, either hybrid or full, correct?
Yes, that's what I laid out in my portfolio of resources.
And Sweep's push for electrification is based on the argument that it is lower cost, correct?
Yeah, in part, in addition to the this commission and the state's roadmap have found that electrification is a key component of the state and gas utilities in particular reaching their carbon emission reduction goals.
All right. We'll talk about those other ones in a moment. In terms of cost, Sweep's proposal consists of an incentive of $2,000 per customer. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's what I proposed, and that value was based on there's a successful dual fuel electrification program in Utah run jointly by Rocky Mountain Power and Dominion Energy, and their combined incentives are around $2,000 depending on the equipment. Some are a little higher, some are a little lower.
How do you expect the customer or what do you expect, or how much do you expect the customer out-of-pocket costs to be?
I mean, for a hybrid system, I assume that a customer was replacing their furnace already. A lot of customers, when that happens, choose to also replace their air conditioners at the same time, though not always, just because having units that work together it is convenient. So it's hard to say exactly, what the total out-of-pocket cost is because it depends on the assumptions. They're already likely paying $10,000 to $15,000 for a new furnace at this time. So standard efficiency hybrid heat pump on top of that would probably add, $10,000 or so in total. Though, incentives from the utility would and any other incentives available, such as the homes in here rebates that Mr. Hay talked about, would take a chunk out of that.
So to make this clear, you're saying 10 to 15 plus an additional 10 on top for 25,000?
Yeah, potentially if they're replacing their furnace and air conditioner at the same time. I mean, so I'm not talking incremental costs just for electrification. That would be sort of total cost that they're probably already likely paying most of.
And you made a statement. Let me make sure that I've got this correct. Sweep assumes the customer would keep their current furnace as a backup heating source for 75% of the systems. Is that correct?
Yeah, they would keep a furnace. I guess I made the assumption that in just trying to hypothetically come up with numbers that we were replacing furnaces at the time of failure, not air conditioners. They have a similar turnover rate. But yeah, assuming that there is a backup furnace, whether it's their existing furnace or a new furnace.
And if there's a backup furnace that the customer keeps, did you make any assumptions around when that furnace would be replaced and the value that furnace replacement would have in the sweep analysis?
I didn't, assuming that the customer would have to pay for a furnace replacement at the time of failure, with or without adding a heat pump.
And Sweep's proposal modeled support of electrification at a pace consistent with the greenhouse gas roadmap 2.0 assumptions. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you would agree with me that the baseline in the roadmap is that the gas utilities will meet the targets for 2030.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. And I think the adoption of heat pumps an electrification in the roadmap was based on an electrification potential study that CO conducted. I can't remember which year, but the pace of electrification was not sort of set a priori based on meeting the reduction targets. It was based on a potential study that CO had commissioned.
You would agree with me that SWEEP's proposal is not sufficient to put Black Hills, Colorado Gas on pace necessary to meet the 2030 clean heat target?
Not on a linear pace from 2025 to 2030. We're only talking about 2 years now, though.
In fact, it only achieves 15% of the emissions reductions that are necessary. SWEEP's original proposal, correct?
I can't remember the number off the top of my head. If there's somewhere in my testimony you can point me to, that would be helpful. Apologies.
No worries. It's been a little while for all of us. If we can pull up hearing exhibit 500, please. And if we can go to page 45. And looking down at lines 5 through 7, the SWEEP portfolio only achieves 15% of the emissions reductions that the company forecasts are necessary to meet the 2030 clean heat target. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
Do you know if Atmos is on a path to meet the 2030 clean heat target?
I guess based on some of the conversations earlier in this hearing, it does not appear so, but I don't know. I haven't looked at their numbers recently personally.
You would agree that there are other funding sources available for electrification other than Black Hills, Colorado Gas, correct?
Yes.
In fact, your testimony discussed several funding sources for electrification. Is that accurate?
I believe so.
Did you have an opportunity to listen in during yesterday's hearing?
I was in and out a little, but I was here for most. I was listening for most of it.
Did you have an opportunity to hear the discussion about the electrification programs in effect for the 23 electric utilities in the Black Hills, Colorado service territory?
Yeah, I believe I was here for that. I was listening for that part.
You also appear to argue that the cost to customers are reasonable because there is a statutory requirement to reduce emissions. Do you recall that testimony?
That the cost of the SWEEP portfolio are reasonable?
Correct.
Yeah, I remember that.
And to be clear, we're only talking about the SWEEP portfolio. So you're not saying that no matter what the cost is, because there's a statutory requirement to reduce emissions, it's appropriate or reasonable.
No, I think I tied my argument around reasonable cost to saying the gas utility, there's a statutory emission reduction requirement on Black Hills, Colorado Gas, and to show that it's reasonable, the commission or the company should be maximizing the lowest cost resources available rather than paying for other higher cost resources. And according to my analysis conducted by the state, and analysis conducted by Public Service Colorado and their clean heat plan, energy efficiency and electrification are those two lowest cost resources. And thus by relying primarily or exclusively on those resources in the SWEEP portfolio, that those costs are reasonable as compared to relying on more costly resources.
You would agree with me that Black Hills, Colorado Gas provides only gas utility service. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. You also appear to have issues with the company's modeling, arguing in your testimony that it included the full cost of a measure, but failed to include the full range of benefits. Do you recall that testimony?
Yeah, I think I made other critiques, but that was one of them.
All right. And the two benefits that you claim are not included are avoided gas system, O&M, and gas system upgrade costs. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
And you would agree with me that there's no evidence in this proceeding that electrification, and specifically with a hybrid system as SWEEP is advocating, would reduce O&M costs, correct?
I guess I don't think a hybrid system would make an impact on O&M. I could see you making that argument around capital, but presumably as throughput goes down, operation and maintenance costs would also go down. I don't recall any evidence in this proceeding, though I know that has been discussed in other clean heat plans.
Let's talk about the non-hybrid scenario just for a second. You would agree with me that O&M costs would likely not be reduced when individual homes are fully electrified, but it would rather take a slightly larger group. So like a neighborhood might have some sort of shift in O&M costs.
Again, when we're talking about
or-
capital, I would agree with you, but O&M not necessarily.
All right. Can we pull up hearing exhibit 500, page 39? If we can go down to line 15. The ultimate goal is to fully decarbonize buildings. Would you agree with that?
That's what the roadmap states is needed to meet the state's 2050 emission reduction target.
So you would agree with me that SWEEP's proposal here is just the first step. Is that accurate?
Well, it's the first step in putting the company on a path to achieve that. I think there are multiple pathways, and we're likely not going to be able to reach full decarbonization by totally electrifying everything. There will be molecules running through the gas system at some point by 2050. So yeah, I guess I agree that this plan is the first step in putting the company on a pathway to achieve full decarbonization of buildings if the state is to reach its decarbonization goals.
And SWEEP's proposal here is that the electrification program be implemented when replacing heating at the time of failure and not air conditioners, correct?
Well, I guess this gets into a question of like program design versus what I modeled to develop a illustrative budget. So I don't think I would propose in program design limiting to furnace failure, but I was trying to make conservative assumptions around customer adoption in my modeling. So I assumed replacement at furnace failure rather than AC failure or both, just because it's slightly fewer points of failure, and allowed me to, by using the again, as we talked about already, I was using the electrification adoption rates from the roadmaps modeling. So I guess that's all to say I wouldn't limit it in program design, but that is what I did in modeling, just as a way to try to develop an illustrative budget and what sort of consistent adoption rates with the roadmap would look like for Black Hills, Colorado Gas.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Brandt. Nothing further, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Goman.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Brandt.
Good morning.
I just have a few questions for you, and if some of them are a few kind of hit on some of the modeling, so if you need to defer me, go ahead, but figured I'd try with you since you're here. So Mr. Cottrell zeroed in on two major issues. I think it was during his redirect today, between your calculation and theirs. He identified, and that's for beneficial electrification, essentially, analysis. And he identified those two as the levels of incentives being offered and the participation levels. So I was just curious, from your perspective, do you agree with those as the main differences? Do you identify others? Just wanted to get like a broad feedback on that.
I mean, I think those are some key differences in terms of determining cost and cost effectiveness in particular. Um, there's a number of other key differences around the greenhouse gas emissions assumptions used by the company um, and sweep. So I think the company in its modeling, you talked about this a bit yesterday. They used the eGrid database. Specifically, they used the eGrid database from 2018, which had been updated 3 times by the time that they did the modeling for this proceeding. The eGrid database comes out about every year, though it's delayed. So I think 2018 data was published like January of 2020, but then January of 21, January of 22, and January of 23, those data were updated. So, in terms of determining sort of greenhouse gas emission reductions from electrification, I think that was a really big difference. They used a sort of old, backwards looking um, emissions factor for Colorado, whereas Mr. Conch could talk a little more specifically about what we used, but we used an emissions factor that was taking into account the state's uh, carbon reduction goals for the electric sector and the clean heat plans that had been filed to date, or not clean heat plans, sorry, clean energy plans that had been filed to date. So I guess that is another big difference in the modeling between us and the company around electrification. I'm trying to think if I remember of any others off the top of my head. But I guess the cost piece comes down to it's not just the cost of the equipment. They're assuming a panel upgrade in every home that installs the heat pump and adding that cost to the total cost. And then in addition, they were including heat pump water heaters. Again, not opposed to Black Hills supporting heat pump water heaters as part of electrification, but that was not something that I that we included in our modeling at all.
Okay. Thanks for that. And just so I understand, like the greenhouse gas difference would factor in a few ways to my understanding. First, with regard to the actual calculation of benefits, as you transition the loads to electric and the allocation of like the monetary value of the greenhouse gas associated with that new usage, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the net emission reductions.
Okay, as well as getting to some of Mr. Harrington's discussion about the definition of beneficial electrification requiring an emissions reduction. So are those
Correct.
the two like main uses of where that's operable, I guess, to my understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would sort of similar to the first one, it flows through to like developing abatement, like carbon abatement costs in dollars per metric ton. So all these other sort of costs and considerations that are tied to emissions reductions, it would flow through beyond just the cost benefit analysis.
Okay, got it. And then with regard to the greenhouse gas, just real quick in the company's planning, I know because they have the GTI study as well as this internal study, so I'm sometimes turning myself around about what assumption was used where. To my understanding, the GTI study, there is like a future grid looking out to 2040 mix change, or are there any forward projections in their internal study and analysis?
No, my understanding is their internal study just used the 2018 eGrid data in its modeling. And I know there was a lot of discussion of this in the first hearing on this proceeding, so I know that's in the record. So you can probably get more detail there.
Excellent. And then let's see. Okay, so going to the cost of incentives being provided for the measure, which Mr. Cottrell identified as like the first main difference. I know you had hit on the panel upgrade in each circumstance, but I also wanted to get to this difference on modeling kind of total cost assumed for the measure versus just some incremental cost. And it sounds like one of the really core differences, as you were going over with Mr. Koshin, is your assumption that there is just some incremental cost that you're covering. And so I'm curious, where confidence comes from that that is the right amount to kind of move the market and get actual uptake of the rebates. I mean, the whole question is what makes this behavior happen? Probably everyone wants to pay the minimum incentive cost to make the behavior happen. So, why is your value there? Upon what's that based?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I talked about a bit with Mr. Koshin, I based my incentive level on a successful program in Utah. So Dominion Energy, and they're now known as Enbridge, is the gas utility that serves the western the western front, the Salt Lake City area of Utah, and Rocky Mountain Power is the electric utility. And they've, in combination for a number of years now, run a dual fuel heat pump furnace incentive program. And there's incentives from both of those utilities, but and that program has been very successful. So the first 3 years of the program, I think they did about 5,000 units, and those numbers have gone up significantly. I think it started in about 2020, so that was through 2023. Those were the only numbers I was able to readily find, but that was in the first 3 years. But I know, at least last I had heard, they'd been continuing to increase those the sales and effectiveness of that program over time. And the combined rebates from the gas and electric utility are about $2,000. They vary depending on if you're replacing your furnace and adding a heat pump and the efficiency of those two units. So I think if you are doing both and they're at the highest efficiency, it's about 2,500. And if you're just adding a heat pump and it's a lower efficiency unit, it's like a little under $2,000. At the time I made this proposal, there were there still are state tax credits, but the federal tax credits were also available. So, I think I was also trying to take those other resources into account in developing that. But, really relying on that program as an example in a similar climate, in a similar, suburban, highly, fast growing area of a program that had been successful, and in that value of incentive had shown that it can move the market in that example.
Okay. And just curious, kind of related to that, I know Ms. Ceramos was talking about really wanting to understand the market better as like a key driver of going for an electrification study. Clearly, we've got a Black Hills survey in this proceeding, which your council got into. And I'm curious, what other kind of publicly available sources are there for us to really understand customer preference and sentiment? In kind of a unbiased way with someone who is not on one side or the other. That seems to be a key question, especially around, segue into participation, which is the second key question. A lot of it gets to what are reasonable participation levels, what incentive is needed to incent the market, which are your key differences, it sounds like, with the company. And I'm just curious, how do we bridge that gap? How do we answer those questions that really appear like the core differences?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you've hit the nail right on the head. It's really hard to do that empirically because so much of a customer, I think we've generally found as customers get more education about electrification and heat pumps and their functionality, they're more willing to adopt and consider the technology. So a lot of it is, the discussions between a contractor and a homeowner, the one making decision, that happen at a kitchen table or dining room table. So I think it's really hard to, survey anything right now and say, oh, this is these are the assumptions we can make. I know that there are a number of potential studies, done by public service company, done by the energy office, which is attempted through surveys and sort of willingness to pay to estimate, what is an achievable adoption rate. So, I think my assumption would be I haven't looked at the CO electrification potential study in a little bit, but my assumption would be that, those adoption rates would be based on survey data and other information specific to Colorado. And again, that's sort of why I use that resource as the basis of my modeling, because at least as far as I know, that's one of the more independent, one would hope, that's run by the state analyses of electrification. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, we just sort of need to try things out and try out different levels of incentives and different marketing approaches. And there's a lot of barriers in it. It's going to be, it might be challenging, but it's important to be putting these programs in the market and offering incentives and really working to remove barriers and educate contractors so that we can all be successful in achieving these targets.
Okay. And to that end, Mr. Hagland had expressed concerns over the potential of implementing more electrification than essentially Black Hills is willing to agree to, in part due to the unlikelihood of successful implementation with forcing them to do something they don't want to offer is just unlikely to be successful. And I will note that you recommend for Rocky Ford that the company hire a third party to oversee, develop, and implement the BE programs. So correct me if that's not your current position. I read that somewhere.
That went beyond Rocky Ford. I think that was my
Okay.
proposal around electrification writ large.
So help me understand, I mean, that seems to address like Mr. Hagland's concern to some degree, the concern that, well, even if you order something, it won't be successful. But like, how would that practically kind of be implemented and structured in order to deliver by third party?
Yeah, that's a good question. I certainly share his concern, and I laid that out in my original answer testimony. I think the states we've seen with the most successful third-party implementation programs, have basically an independent third party running them. So, for example, Efficiency Maine or the Energy Trust of Oregon, Efficiency Vermont. They essentially have an independent energy efficiency or electrification utility who sort of holds those contracts and runs the programs. I guess I've been assuming that that is challenging to set up and would take more than Black Hills in Colorado if the state were to move in that direction. So in my answer testimony, I tried to lay out a model that could work in this proceeding where essentially the utility is going out to contract, but there's a stakeholder process and they're filing sort of the RFP with the commission before going out to contract it, so that we're at least having some process so that we can try to ensure that the contract itself is appropriate in terms of bringing on a third-party implementer, and that there's an opportunity for stakeholder input and an opportunity for stakeholder comments to the commission on the RFP itself. So, that proposal would take a bit to implement, and I understand that, but I guess it seems like there would need to be some level of oversight by the commission if we are asking the company itself to hold that contract, just given the concerns Mr. Hagland raised and that we're discussing.
Okay. Those are my only questions. Thanks, Mr. Brandt. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Commissioner Plant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Brandt. It seems like there's a number of people who have either changed jobs or left jobs or
Yeah, it's like one of those proceedings when there are a number of babies born during it.
Right, exactly.
There are a lot of life changes that's happened at this time.
Well, congratulations on your new role.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of general questions. You were talking just now with Commissioner Gilman about third-party implementation and comparing to some of the other successful programs around the country, Energy Trust Oregon, Efficiency Vermont, Maine. Do you know in those programs, I think they operate sort of across fuels, let's say. They're kind of doing electric and gas programs. Do you know if the beneficial electrification programs that they're operating, are they exclusively funded through the electric utilities or do they utilize gas company funding for beneficial electrification programs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know in Vermont that I guess I can't speak to the funds that are run by Efficiency Vermont, but I know Vermont Gas Company, or they're called VGS now, I think. They do run an electrification program for heat pump water heaters, definitely, and I believe heat pumps as well. I don't know about sort of the statewide Efficiency Vermont funding, if that also comes from the gas utility. I guess I'm not familiar enough with Maine or Oregon to talk about that. I will say in Massachusetts, so the Mass Save program is run by the utilities. It's not a third party implementer, but all the electric and gas utilities collaboratively run sort of a statewide branded energy efficiency and electrification program. And in that program, I do know that electrification incentives are coming from the gas utilities as well as the electric utilities.
Okay, thank you for that. If you were to look at, the full panoply of programs and things that are available here, what would you say are the top most cost-effective ways to reduce emissions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think energy efficiency and electrification are the two lowest cost resources. As you know, I showed in my testimony. I think the company's modeling found that for energy efficiency, that's what Public Hills is. Sorry, Public Hills, Public Service Company found in their modeling. The greenhouse gas roadmap relies on electrification and energy efficiency as sort of two core um, uh, legs of the stool. I can't remember the
I guess
term of art in
I'm
the room.
talking more rather than sort of general categories, specific measures. What are the
Oh,
most?
specific measures. Yeah, I mean, I think on the electrification side, uh, the most cost effective is probably water heating, to be honest with you. Just because, uh, it's more of a slam. My understanding is it's more of a slam dunk from a customer perspective on cost. Replacing um, a gas water heater with an electric water heater will likely see bills go down. Though Mr. Conj again could talk about sort of the modeling of space heating as well, but I think that's still shown to be highly cost effective. Sort of generally for the state, the question of is it a little harder because of some customers may see an increase in bills, is a big one, and again just makes it maybe a little more challenging overall, but from a cost effectiveness standpoint, because there's greater savings, I think the cost effectiveness is often higher. On the energy efficiency side, I guess I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I think weatherization sometimes has challenges using our traditional cost effectiveness tests, but it doesn't mean that that's not probably the best opportunity to reduce emissions on the gas side in terms of investing in sort of no regrets energy efficiency. I will say, I think there's other non-equipment energy efficiency beyond just weatherization and air sealing that I don't think would sort of run afoul to the commission's guidance on not investing in appliances, but would be maybe a little broader and sort of address some of the issues the company had raised previously, sort of things like smart thermostats, or I think they had like water heating, heat recovery, sort of pipe insulation. So some other measures that are sort of within the realm of non-equipment measures, but are not merely just weatherization. So I'm not sure that totally answers your question, but.
Yeah, well, going to the question of weatherization, are you familiar? I think Commissioner Gilman pointed out yesterday that about half of the budget for the last TSM plan was not used, and I think we heard that they kind of burned through their new construction budget, and so it seems like y- that's somewhere in there, like things like weatherization, they're not getting utilized, sounds like to me. Do you know, is that the case? Are they not getting uptake on their uh air sealing, insulation?
Yeah, I guess I'm not familiar with Black Hills programs specifically. I will say in general, I think Colorado has had some struggles, the utilities in Colorado, on the sort of retrofit weatherization programs. And, there are potential program design changes that, at least in my prior position at Swoop, we were talking with Excel about a number of times to try to overcome that. But it's a challenging, it's been a challenging market in Colorado to get uptake of weatherization incentives sort of at levels that we've seen in leading jurisdictions.
Do you see that those barriers as being primarily the incentive level or the contractor base or the way that the programs are rolled out? What's the sort of the
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of all those things. The most successful programs I'm aware of, um, I guess it's the Mass Save program. And they sort of run it more like a one-stop shop concept where, customers get an energy audit through the utility or a contractor of their choice. And they've negotiated, they basically pre-negotiated pricing for installation with all their contractors. So a customer gets an audit, and as part of that audit, the auditor can suggest the most cost-effective measures or the recommended measures for their customer. And if it's weatherization, they can give them the price. And then if the customer wants to move forward, they just assign them an independent contractor who does the work at the pre-negotiated price. It's a little different in Colorado where you usually, again, I'm more familiar with public service companies programs and Black Hills Electric programs and their gas programs, but usually, you have to get an audit and get the recommendations. Then you have to find installation contractors and get a number of quotes and compare quotes that might be different. And, it just adds sort of more friction to the process and more points where a customer can back out. So I think program design is a big part of that. Incentive levels are often tied to that in terms of, whether you're making it a more obvious choice for the customer and, how much out of pocket they're having to pay. But I think the program pieces, and I guess I will say it is a big lift to set up a program like that. You need buy-in from your contractor base because most of them don't like pre-negotiated prices. They would rather try to sell directly to the customer at sort of the prices that they think are appropriate.
how do the incentive levels compare?
That I can't say off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
And do you know, are there any contractor focused incentives within the weatherization?
With Black Hills, not that I'm aware of for weatherization, but again, I'm not totally familiar with there. I know Public Service does now have a small weatherization contractor incentive.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Plant. Just a couple questions. That Utah Enbridge example you mentioned, is that a gas-only utility? And if so, how are they dealing with all the misaligned incentives that Black Hills was talking about in this hearing?
But yeah, Enbridge, used to be called Dominion, is a gas-only utility in Utah. I know Dominion at least certainly has electric subsidiaries in other jurisdictions. And this was a choice. Sweep works very closely with the utility. Utah is one of Sweep states, so had worked very closely with Dominion staff. And this was a program they came up with on their own in conjunction with the electric utility Rocky Mountain Power, which is a totally separate entity owned by a very different, completely different company. They're unrelated in any way. So, I think they thought hybrid systems are a much better option from the gas utilities perspective, and that it was in their best interest to be promoting hybrid systems rather than facing a risk of full electrification, where they would lose the customers completely. So they made the choice to develop this program. There's very little Public Utility Commission oversight over energy efficiency in Utah. So this was completely developed by the gas utility on their own initiative, and then socialized with stakeholders and implemented by the gas and electric utilities in conjunction. So I don't know exactly what their motivation is, but they certainly didn't see those things as barriers to implementing a program for a gas-only utility.
And without violating any confidentiality around settlement discussions, do you have any view of why Black Hills wouldn't do something similar here?
I mean, I think as you highlighted in the CWM last week, Black Hills has shown no interest in any electrification, as showing that they will fight any requirements from the utility through the court system. So you'd have to ask them why they don't see that this is a path forward. But I guess in Swoop's mind, it certainly is.
And assume for the reasons outlined by Mr. Haglund that this commission is going to struggle to allocate a bunch of customer money for implementation to implement programs that a utility fundamentally doesn't want to do. Just assume that for purposes of this question. What should we do? My idea was to convert the study into a pilot, and the cost of the program is no different than the cost of the study. And at least we have a early read on the legal and policy issues as time moved on. But any comments on that idea, or you have any other ideas, assuming this commission isn't going to force customer money to be spent by a utility that just doesn't want to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with just I think anything that would achieve emissions reductions would be better than this study, which, as I laid out in my second settlement testimony, I don't see a lot of value in. I wasn't in the Atmos Clean Heat Plan proceeding, but my memory is that that the company didn't really put any information around electrification into the record, so there might have been more of a gap in terms of sort of cost and cost effectiveness of electrification. I don't think that's not the case in this proceeding. There is certainly lots of information, and while the company and Sweep don't agree on the reasonableness of some of the assumptions, I think what we did is really based on the commission's Public Service Company of Colorado decision, and really tried to stick with that. So I guess that's to say, $300,000 probably won't move the needle on electrification. I don't know if it's enough to sort of move the case into the courts if that's the goal. I don't know. I don't think that should be the goal, but I think it would be better than nothing, but it's sort of, from an electrification standpoint, just a drop in the bucket. But, I think we'd be supportive of trying to expand the pilot beyond Rocky Ford to the extent the commission chooses to go in that direction. Trying to think in terms of other ideas,
Just
like I
let me ask
said,
you one thing on that. Any advice on how to do that in the best way? Pick another community.
Yeah, I mean, I think some ideas that Sweep had I've been thinking about this one a bit over the last year or so, 6 months, I guess. Yeah, if we were to expand to, another community or two, maybe trying to choose communities that are of a certain size, and characteristic, trying to make them more representative of the company's service territory as a whole. Rocky Ford is a pretty unique small town. Most of the company's service territory is fast-growing suburbs south of Denver. So I guess ideally we'd be maybe a little more representative of that. And then I think the questions that the company has raised around working with different electric utilities, you probably maybe ideally want to choose two communities with two different electric providers to try to work out some of those questions.
Any other, again, assuming that we're not going to put a bunch of customer money into programs that the entity implementing has no interest in. So just assume that. Any other advice about what to do in this case?
Yeah, I guess I've been trying to think are there other sort of program implementers that Black Hills customer funds could be used to subsidize? I don't know if it's possible some of the programs that the Energy Office is laying out through their implementation or the DRCOG programs, which, doesn't have perfect overlap with the company's service territory, but I believe at least some of it is within the DRCOG program. So I guess those are other, same with Public Service Company of Colorado, Holy Cross Energy, some of the electric utilities that serve the company's service territory and do run sort of more robust programs or are running their own programs. So, I think there could be ways to be trying to funnel monies into those existing programs that are already serving the Black Hills customer base.
Last question for you. Did you and Ms. Durkee go to the same consulting company?
We did, coincidentally.
So it's not a plot to...
It was total coincidence, but I'm excited to have her as a colleague.
Well, I appreciate them letting you testify at the same time they didn't let her testify. So that's all I got. Redirect Mr. Hyatt.
Yes, just I think three hopefully quick issues, Mr. Brandt. Do you recall a discussion with Commissioner Gilman on third-party implementation and a process to implement a third-party implementer?
I do.
All right, if we could please pull up here in Exhibit 500, which is Mr. Brandt's answer testimony. If we could go to page 44, please. All right, so Mr. Brandt, do you see here in your answer testimony at the top of this page in this question and answer, you provide a potential process for hiring a third-party administrator?
I do, yes.
And I think during your discussion with Commissioner Gilman just now, you noted it could take a while to fully implement a third-party implementer. So do you see here that on lines 5 through 7, you propose an RFP process with a goal to file a draft RFP with the commission 90 days after a final order?
Yeah, I see that.
And you also see on line 10 here that under your proposed process, the company could then issue the RFP with a goal of having a third-party administrator ready to begin providing BE incentives by January 1st, 2026.
I see that, yes.
And so we've obviously lost approximately a year of this time, but under this proposed process here, do you think it would be feasible and reasonable to have a third-party administrator in place by early 2027?
I do, yeah. I think in my original proposal, I didn't have any beneficial electrification funds in the first year of the plan, which in that plan was 2025, so that this process could play itself out. So yeah, I mean, at this point, it would probably, I think what we would recommend is sort of pushing all those BE incentives back another year and trying to start a program the second year of this plan, which would be January 1st, 2027.
Okay, thank you. We can pull down this exhibit now. Second topic, do you recall your discussion with Commissioner Gilman on some of the differences between SWEEP's modeling of BE and the company's modeling and its input and assumptions?
I do.
In your opinion, is SWEEP's modeling and all the assumptions in SWEEP's modeling or the company's modeling more consistent with this commission's decision and PSCo's clean heat plan proceeding on proper ways to model BE?
I think the SWEEP modeling is, I sort of alluded to this or discussed it with, I think one of the commissioners. Yeah, in the PSCo case, I think the commission found that sort of a modified utility cost test would be a more appropriate cost benefit analysis for clean heat resources. So I tried to utilize that same approach in my cost benefit modeling. And in addition, there was a lot of discussion sort of around the use of incentive scalars and, whether, related to cost issues, which the commission ultimately rejected. So again, just tried to be consistent with that in sort of determining the cost of electrification to consider within the modeling and sort of development of abatement costs.
Okay, third and final topic. Do you recall your discussion earlier with Mr. Koshin and the point that the sweep portfolio in this case would only achieve 15% of the emissions reductions that are necessary to meet the 2030 target?
Yeah, I do.
Given that fact and that the sweep portfolio would not fully achieve 2030 or put the company on path to fully achieving the 2030 emissions targets, why do you believe the sweep portfolio is a more reasonable result out of this proceeding for this first clean heat plan than the second settlement agreement?
I think the sweep portfolio puts the company on a much, I mean, it has significantly more emission reductions than the settlement agreement. But I'd say more importantly is just in terms of the trajectory for future reductions. What the company lays out, I think is, energy efficiency, but also a reliance on AMLD and renewable natural gas, which, we've raised questions on whether those emission reductions will even count in the future. And even if they do, they're investments the company would sort of have to make each year. Whereas, laying the groundwork and starting a program focused on electrification would presumably allow for significant increase in emission reductions in the future. Once we have the infrastructure in place and a third party implementer potentially, it'll take a year or two to get those programs up and running. But I think as I tried to show in my modeling, that would allow us to significantly ramp up emission reductions in the company's next plan as we move towards 2030 and beyond.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have.
Thank you. You may be excused, Mr. Brandt. Thanks for joining us. Mr. Conj, are you out there? Can you hold up your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
You can put your hand down. Is anybody with you or communicating with you in any way?
No.
If that changes, will you let us know?
Yeah.
Back to you, Mr. Hyatt.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kanj. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Sure. First name Wael is W-A-E-L. Last name Kanj is K-A-N-J.
And you are testifying on behalf of SWEEP in this proceeding?
Yeah.
Who are you employed by and in what capacity?
I'm employed at Rewiring America as a research manager.
And did you file answer testimony in this case, which is hearing exhibit 501?
Yes.
Hearing exhibit 501 has already been admitted into evidence. Mr. Kanj is available for cross-examination.
Mr. Koshin, 15 minutes, and it's 12:08.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chairman Blank. Good afternoon, Mr. Kanj.
Good afternoon.
It's good to see you again. I will try to make this quick and painless. If we can turn to hearing exhibit 501, page 10, please. And looking down at table WK-3, it appears your analysis provides a comparison to a baseline 80% efficient natural gas unit and 60% efficient natural gas unit to demonstrate the total costs for a heat pump are lower, correct?
They're included here, yeah, just for this illustrative example, but it's not, it's more to counter a statement about the cost of gas and electricity, and it's not sort of the primary part of my testimony. But yes, that's what I use here.
All right, and for comparison purposes, if we're looking at a heat pump versus a furnace, you would agree that it makes more sense to compare an efficient air source heat pump to an efficient natural gas unit, such as a 97% furnace. Is that correct?
I think it depends on like the context or the purpose of the comparison that's being made. That that could be a comparison that's also made as well, though. Yes.
Okay. Let's see here. Can we go to page 6, please? And looking at line 9, you state that the heat pumps selected were similar to those that would qualify for the Inflation Reduction Act's home energy tax credits.
Yes,
Is that
that's right.
correct? And you would agree with me that a lot has changed since we last spoke.
Yes.
Looking down at lines 22 and 23.
Yes.
You described the calculations of utility average rates for electricity and gas, correct?
Yes.
And turning to the next page, you provide the average electricity rates.
Yes.
On line 3. And those were the rates that were used in your analysis, 12 cents per kilowatt hour.
Yep.
Now, we talked about this a little bit last time, but your modeling looked at rates at a specific point in time, correct?
Yes.
And do you recall the conversation we had about various utilities in Colorado increasing their electric rates at that time?
Yes.
And this included Black Hills, Colorado Gas, Colorado Spring Utilities, and we even walked through a 30-year model developed by commission staff showing that Public Service Company of Colorado's electric rates were focused to double. Do you recall that discussion?
Yes, I do.
And now, if we can look at page 7, line 11, it states the emission factor used for on-site electricity consumption is 162 kilograms per megawatt hour of CO2e at the point of end use, which was sourced from the Colorado's GHG Pollution Reduction Roadmap 2.0. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And can we please pull up hearing exhibit 501, the executable attachment WK-2?
Just give me a second. I have to pull that from a different place.
And if we can go to column K, please. And so, Mr. Kanj, this is your work paper provided to parties in support of the modeling. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And looking at column K, you would agree with me that average electricity emissions factor is just a value without a traceable source, correct?
Yeah, I believe it's hard coded in there. Yes.
Yeah. And the 162 kilograms per megawatt hour is not specifically found in the roadmap, correct?
That's right. We calculated based on the baseline emission scenario, which is modeled in I think Colorado's energy policy simulator. So it's based on the sort of baseline scenario for emissions from electricity generation.
And so electricity generation was taken into account in this analysis.
Yes.
And you would agree with me that the Colorado Greenhouse Gas Pollution Reduction Roadmap is a plan of how the state could get to a final outcome, correct?
Yes.
All right. And to make sure we're clear, your modeling looked at current energy prices that we know are going to change and future emissions factors that have yet to actually occur. Is that more or less a correct description?
Yeah, the emissions factor in the baseline scenario, I believe a big part of that is based on the statutory requirement for emissions reductions for electricity generation in the state. I believe that's sort of like the foundation of that modeled future-looking emissions scenario. So that is the emissions factor we used for this. Yeah.
And I want to clarify one thing. If we could pull up hearing 501. And go to page 6 and lines 6 through 8. It appears that you modeled air source heat pump using electric resistance backup. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And Mr. Brandt's testimony seemed to model electrification with gas furnace backup.
I believe his model had, I think he referred to that as 75% of them were included existing fuel backup. Yeah.
And can you just explain why the difference?
Our modeling capabilities at the time were only for like full electrification of the heating source. So because our modeling is done on Restock, just like our modeling capabilities were only for heat pump with electric resistance backup, not the existing fuel backup.
All right. And Rewiring America is an electrification nonprofit. Is that correct?
I think that's how we describe ourselves. Yeah.
All right. And its focus is on electrifying homes, businesses, and communities, correct?
Yes.
And your specific focus, as described in testimony, is to quantify costs and benefits of electrification for both research and advocacy purposes?
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Conch. Nothing further, Chairman Bling.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilman.
No questions. Thanks, Mr. Conch.
Commissioner Plant.
I have no questions.
Nor do I. Redirect Mr. Hyatt.
Sure. Mr. Kanj, do you recall your conversation just now with Mr. Koshin about different assumptions in your modeling versus Mr. Brandt's about electric resistance backup versus a furnace backup?
Yes.
Just to be clear, the modeling you conducted in this case was not a modeling exercise for the sweep portfolio presented by Mr. Brandt, was it?
That's right. My modeling was to highlight the emissions reductions potential for electrifying space heating in the service territory and to quantify the other impacts to households, like the bill impacts.
Okay. And do you also recall a series of questions from Mr. Koshin about the electricity prices and the assumptions you modeled and his characterization that those prices we know are going to change?
I do recall that. Yep.
So why did you choose your assumptions for your electricity pricing?
So we chose those because, if we wanted to include any sort of forward-looking changes in electricity costs, because the modeling takes into account both the removal of or reduction or elimination of gas usage in the home, as well as increased electricity, we would have to also incorporate or try to forecast natural gas prices in the territory. And because we didn't feel sort of that we had a good source for both of those kinds of numbers, felt like the modeling would be best performed with existing prices, which we know what they are, rather than trying to rely on forecasts for gas as well as electricity costs, which could be, very uncertain or, it's very difficult to tell sort of how accurate those might be.
Okay, finally, do you recall Mr. Koshin drew your attention to your testimony and your statement that you modeled heat pumps that had a performance that would be consistent with what would qualify for Inflation Reduction Act rebates? Do you recall that, generally?
Yes.
And I think he noted that a lot has changed since he last talked to you. You'd agree with that, correct?
Yes.
So can you just please explain the changes in the Inflation Reduction Act that have occurred since you filed this testimony? To what extent do they impact the findings and conclusions you presented in this proceeding?
Sure. I believe what we're referring to is the fact that the tax credits, which are the 30% or up to $2,000 for an air source heat pump tax credit, are ending at the end of 2025 calendar year. They are still available as of now for any installation that happens in the next 2 months. But I don't believe they would change the results of my testimony because I didn't factor in the cost or the value of that tax credit into my analysis. It simply sort of helped guide, the sort of selection of the general efficiencies of the heat pumps that we modeled. And those efficiency ratings were sort of selected to be reasonably similar to heat pumps that many households might buy because they meet certain performance standards. So the removal of the tax credit, soon to be removal of the tax credit, I don't think changes any of the conclusions of my analysis because even after the tax credit is gone, households could still buy and will still be buying heat pumps that are similar in performance to the one that we modeled.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Those are all my questions.
Mr. Kane, you may be excused. Thank you for joining us. Would suggest statement of positions due November 14th. So I guess, well, before we get to that, any final things, Mr. Koshin, for the record, or are you happy with how the record sits, Mr. Hyatt, others?
Chairman Blank, I do have a couple things to help clean up the record that I'd like to potentially do with Mr. Harrington, if possible.
How long is this going to take?
It should take us no more than 3 minutes.
Yep. Mr. Harrington, are you out there? Welcome back. Do you recall you're still under oath?
Yes, sir. I recall.
Mr. Koshin.
Could we please pull up hearing exhibit 132 from the company's box? Mr. Harrington, there was a short discussion regarding a partnership in Utah between a gas utility and an electric utility. If we could go down to page, it's going to be, I may have to pull my own box. If we can go down about 4 or 5 pages. Right there. Mr. Harrington, would you agree with me that Dominion Energy, the gas utility, has been able to get decoupled revenue from the Utah Commission?
Yes, that's right. That's what this says here. This is one of the kind of the heart of the issue that I keep bringing up. I talk about this in my direct testimony on page 44. That one of the issues that we need to address for a gas-only utility is the lost fixed cost recovery. Decoupling mechanism and a decoupling rate or method would certainly help address those concerns.
And this is a description, I believe this was actually put together by SWEEP, of the specific clean heat effort that's undergoing in Utah. Is this correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Chairman Blank, I would move for admission of hearing exhibit 132.
Any objection? Mr. Hyatt?
No objection.
So moved.
Can we also pull up hearing exhibit 133? And Mr. Harrington, can you tell me what this is?
This is the Black Hills Colorado Gas and DSM annual report for 2024.
And can we go down to page, I think it's 4? I'm sorry, down a little bit further to the first table. And there were some questions indicating that the company's DSM budget wasn't being used in 2024. Can you describe what the annual report indicates?
Sure. This is in this table ES1. It shows the list of all the DSM programs and the 2024 budget as the first column, and the second column is the 2024 actual DSM expenditures of what the of what we spent on the program.
Chairman Blank, I would ask for administrative notice. This is a document that's regularly filed with the commission. I don't know the proceeding number off the top of my head in which it was filed, but happy for administrative notice, or if you would prefer that we move for admission into the record as an exhibit, we're happy to do that as well.
Mr. Hyatt, any objection?
No objection.
So moved.
With that, I have nothing further, Chairman Blank.
I'm not a fan of redirect at the end of the hearing, but I think both those help the record. So thanks. You may be excused again, Mr. Harrington. Any other record items? Mr. Hyatt, Ms. Dundas, Ms. Smith, Mr. Smith, Ms. Coleman? Nope, I'm seeing head shaking now. Ms. Dundas, you happy with the record?
I think the record should be closed.
Mr. Dixon, Mr. Smith?
I have no problems, Your Honor. I just was shaking my head yes, but my screen was black.
All right. With that, we're gonna close the record and statement of positions due November 14th. Anything else before we adjourn? Thanks all. Appreciate the conversation and look forward to reading the statement of positions. Enjoy lunch. See everybody next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.